Blood shot into the air while Xianxia stood proudly on the spot while remaining completely unharmed. On the other hand, Suolin's face had warped as he howled in pain. His arm had been forcefully slashed off, and blood sprayed towards the surroundings while his arm was instantly transformed into powder. How shocking was this? As a descendant of the 8-arm ghost shaman tribe, Suolin's arms were said to be like peerless blades that weren't inferior to any natural spirit treasure. However, it was slashed off with a single slash of Xianxia's sword. "You're courting death." Suolin was utterly infuriated. He was unable to believe that Xianxia's combat strength was so heaven-defying and a single strand of sword chi would actually be able to destroy an arm of his. However, even though Arui and the others were slightly shocked when they witnessed this scene, they quickly revealed a wisp of displeasure and frowned without end. One of them even shouted loudly, "Suolin, this isn't your style at all. Could it be that you intend to admit defeat?" "Shut your mouth," Suolin shouted explosively while his face warped. In an instant, a short scene occurred. A new arm had actually instantly grown out from the place where Suolin had been injured, and it was peerlessly sharp. The faces of Shiryu and the others fell while the excitement in their hearts was replaced by surprise and bewilderment. Regrowth of an arm? Could it be that he possesses a similar ability as the undying fire shaman, Lai Fulua? I told all of you just now. Even though they are unlike the fiend gods of the current era, all these ancient shamans can be considered to be body refiners. Jianan frowned as he reminded. Body refiners can be reborn from a drop of blood or a single strand of thought. So, they are definitely extremely formidable. Not to mention that these ancient shamans possess various supreme divine abilities. It was just as Jianan had said. Compared to the body refiners of the current era, all of these ancient shamans possessed various inconceivably formidable abilities. For example, the undying fire shaman, Lai Fulua, possessed the undying blood that made him practically impossible to kill. For example, the 8-armed ghost shaman, Suolin, possessed 8 arms that were sharp like weapons, and they weren't weaker to any natural spirit treasure. On the other hand, even though the body refiners of this era could cultivate all sorts of divine abilities like the heavenly transformation and deity transformation, all of these techniques were cultivated and not possessed innately. So, comparatively speaking, it was much more inferior to the ancient shamans. At this moment, Xianxia seemed to have realized this as well. However, his expression was still calm and indifferent while the killing intent in his eyes hadn't reduced at all. "Lowly prey, you're aroused the killing intent in me. I won't hold back. This is the end." Amidst an extremely icy cold voice, a swish resounded as Suolin's figure shot forward like a bolt of lightning. His arms were like blades that could tear the heavens apart. They emanated cold glows as he rotated them swiftly and assaulted Xianxia. The sharp rays of light they emanated were too dense to the point it seemed like a blade formation, and it even minced the world into pieces. The heavens and the earth wailed incessantly, while its terrifying might simply seem to be on the verge of obliterating everything. Unfortunately, all of this was of no threat to Xianxia. Swish! At practically the exact same instant that Suolin attacked, the talisman armament in Xianxia's hand droned as it flashed forward like a ray of light. Bang! A world-shaking sound of collision resounded. The space here collapsed while divine radiance blazed through the surroundings, and the world was filled with the scenes of chaos. On the other hand, Suolin's attack was actually crushed by this terrifying attack. Swish! Fresh blood sprayed into the air. Suolin wasn't even able to evade in time before 2 of his arms were chopped off simultaneously, and they transformed into a rain of blood while his figure was forcefully blasted flying. When they witnessed this scene, the expressions of Arui and the others had finally turned solemn, and they started to reevaluate Xianxia's combat strength. "Damn it! Lowly bastard! You can't kill me!" Suolin let out a world-shaking roar because of the intense pain he felt, and it was even to the extent that his face had warped. Swish! 2 new arms that were like blades had actually grown out from where his arms were previously severed. This was why the ancient shamans were terrifying. They possessed strengths that weren't inferior to region lords, and since they were able to survive the destruction of the last era, they themselves were elites amongst elites, experts amongst experts. Coupled with their terrifying abilities of body refinement, it was obvious how terrifying their strengths were. Earlier, the reason that Zhao Qingyao, Kong Yuran, Ye Chun, and Yu Jihui had suffered miserably defeats and been captured in succession was because they just advanced into the ranks of region lords. Their methods of combat and combat abilities had undergone transformations. So, even though they'd become extremely strong, it was a form of completely new strength in the end, and they were unable to control it in a skillful manner. On the contrary, the ancient shamans had lived for countless years, and their history could even be traces back to the last era. Under such circumstances, it was truly extremely difficult for Zhao Qingyao and the others to resist these ancient shamans. However, it was obvious that Chun Shi wasn't included in this. He'd refined and absorbed the energy within 9 region quintessences, and a unique violet-gold imperial sovereign star had been condensed above his soul, coupled with the transformation of his cultivation in the sword Dao. Even though he was still a first-star imperial monarch right now, his overall combat strength had far surpassed his peers, and it could simply be described as being heaven-defying. Not to mention that he even possessed a form of energy that was like a taboo, the energy of Terminus. Kill. Suolin was furious, and he attacked explosively once more. The entire sacrificial altar was practically filled by the sharp glow that he emanated, and it seemed capable of destroying everything before it. It was too terrifying. If such an existence entered the ancient god domain, then he could even crush many region lords who had made a name for themselves a very long time ago. However, his opponent was a monstrous genius that could never be judged by convention, and this battle was bound to be unusual. Swoosh! A wisp of sword chi rose into the air while Chun Shi's figure remained on the spot without moving. Whereas, this round of attack from Suolin had been destroyed once more. Swish! A severed arm flew into the air while blood poured like a fountain. Suolin had lost an arm again. Kill! At this moment, Suolin had gone completely berserk. Even though he was defeated over and over again, his arms were being grown back without end, and he showed no signs of being injured or crushed at all. Such a scene was sufficient to shock anyone. After all, if this continued, then the advantage that Chun Shi possessed couldn't be considered as an advantage at all. Shiryu and the others shuddered in fear from this sight, and they were extremely worried. On the other hand, Arui and the others seemed to be extremely composed as they watched coldly. Not a single shred of emotion could be discerned from them. They'd similarly discerned that if it was in terms of combat strength, then Suolin really was much inferior to Chun Shi. However, the Tao of body refinement that Suolin possessed was similarly something that Chun Shi couldn't compare to at all. This was why the ancient shamans were terrifying, so how could it be so easy to kill one of them? Chun Shi seemed to have utterly not noticed all of this, and he seemed to have utterly not realized anything different about this battle. He held the talisman armament in hand as he attacked incessantly, crushed Suolin without end, and ceaselessly transformed Suolin's arms into powder. It was even to the extent that there were many occasions later on where Suolin's head was severed, his throat was pierced, his chest was cut open, his legs were cut off. But in the end, Suolin recovered to a whole state over and over again, and he simply seemed impossible to kill. Damn it! Fuck! I'll kill you! Even though he'd quickly recovered every time he was crushed, it still made Suolin burn with rage, and he fell into a berserk state and roared loudly without end. He was unable to accept such a situation where an extremely lowly prey had caused him to be embarrassed over and over again. Moreover, he was utterly unable to do anything to his opponent. Suolin was unable to accept such an outcome. However, he felt aggrieved and helpless because Chun Shi really was too strong, and he was utterly unable to change this situation. Swish! For a time, severed arms and blood flew throughout the shaman's spirit's sacrificial altar. It was a horrifying sight while the battle had fallen into a stalemate. Ha ha ha! You can't kill me. Just give up. All your attacks are useless to me. Suolin roared with laughter, and he seemed to have gone mad. At this point in the battle, Suolin had given up on attacking Chun Shi, and he'd changed his strategy. He intended to exhaust Chun Shi to death by relying on his advantage, which was the fact that he was impossible to kill. This fellow. Arui chuckled while the other ancient shamans in the surroundings laughed with ridicule as well. But no matter what, they were still filled with confidence towards Suolin. Can you really not be killed? Right at this moment, Xianxia suddenly stopped attacking, and he stood in midair while a wisp of a cold arc had arisen on the corners of his mouth. His actions seemed extremely incomprehensible and rather sudden. After all, this was a battle, and the slightest bit of carelessness might cause one to fall into a hopeless situation. But Xianxia had actually stopped attacking. Kill! When he saw this, how could Suolin give up such a superb opportunity? He immediately let out savage laughter as he swung his 8 arms and caused an expanse of surging sharp rays to arise. However, his movements stopped abruptly at this moment. The surging sharp rays had even been released when he seemed to have been frozen on the spot. He was frozen in midair, and even his expression was frozen. He was like a statue. This scene seemed extremely strange. As soon as Xianxia stopped attacking, Suolin's figure had stiffened right after he was just about to attack, and this caused everyone outside the battlefield to open their eyes wide and feel extremely astounded. What's going on? All of this took a long time to describe, yet it actually occurred in an instant. Before all of them could even recover from their shock, cracking resounded like dense rumbling of a drum. After that, they watched in shock as Suolin's entire body seemed as if it was sliced apart by a myriad of blades. His arms, legs, head, body. Everything had exploded into pieces of flesh and blood in an instant. When it came to body refiners, even if their body was destroyed, they could still recover completely if they left just a single thought behind. However, at this moment, not only did Suolin's flesh and blood not fuse back together, they actually started to vanish bit by bit in midair, and then they completely transformed into nothingness. It was even to the extent that his spirit, energy, and essence had vanished completely, and he didn't leave even a trace behind. A terrifying existence amongst the ancient shamans had actually vanished just like that without emitted a single sound. Such a bizarre scene simply shocked Arui and the others to the point their eyes opened wide, and they were completely stunned and filled with disbelief. It wasn't just them. Xianxia and the others had gasped as well, and they fell into unprecedented shock. How exactly did that fellow die? No one knew the answer to this question. It was exactly because of this that it seemed extraordinarily shocking. After a long time passed, there was still not a shred of movement on the sacrificial altar, and Suolin who'd vanished didn't show any sign of coming back to life. This caused Arui and the others to finally ascertain that Suolin had really died. It wasn't just his body that had been destroyed. Even his thoughts and everything he possessed had been completely obliterated. Terminus. It really is Terminus. This fellow hasn't just grasped the Terminus Tao insight, he has even cultivated it to the point of attaining the Terminus Divine Tao. Arui muttered while a wisp of an extremely shocking and blood-red glow arose in his eyes. He'd noticed this when Xianxia killed Lai Fulua just now, but at that time, Arui hadn't imagined that Xianxia's grasp of the Terminus Tao insight had actually arrived at such a height. The Terminus Tao insight and Terminus Divine Tao laws were two completely different things. One was merely Tao insight while the other was a law, and it was even a divine Tao law. Even though their roots were the same, there was a qualitative difference in their might. As far as Arui was concerned, it was only possible for Xianxia to have grasped the Terminus Tao insight because the ancient god domain would absolutely not allow the laws of Terminus that was an energy regarded as a taboo to exist. As an ancient shaman from the last era, Arui had cultivated in the ancient god domain for a myriad of years, so he was extremely clearly aware of this. So, it was very difficult for him to imagine how Xianxia had survived upon grasping such a force, and even became an extremely renowned peerless genius in the ancient god domain. The savior of an era, the river diagram, Terminus. How many secrets are hidden within this fellow? Why is he unlike the saviors of the past? At this instant, it was the first time that Arui felt his knowledge of Xianxia was still too incomplete. It was even to the extent that he felt Xianxia was simply an unfathomable freak. Terminus. When the name of such a taboo entered the ears of Xianxia and the others, tempestuous waves couldn't help but arise in their hearts as well. However, they felt even more excitement. Unlike the seniors of the past, they didn't think that Terminus was very terrifying. Conversely, besides feeling shocked, they also felt astounded that she was able to grasp such a force. It was Terminus. It was a force that could instill fear in the hearts of the gods, and just thinking about it aroused excitement in their hearts. Of course, it was merely how Yu and Qin Xinhui felt. If it was any other old senior from the ancient god domain, then the reaction that person had would probably not be like this. The last days resides in the grand abyss. The karmic tribulation of samsara rises. At this moment, only Jianan was deeply influenced by this, and an indescribably complicated expression surging into his eyes as he gazed at Xianxia. He was dead. After the death of the undying fire shaman, Lai Fulua, Suolin, who was from the 8-armed ghost shaman tribe, had perished in battle as well. The atmosphere in the surroundings was deathly silent. Arui and the others were shocked, and they found it very difficult to accept that Suolin, who possessed an extremely formidable strength amongst them, had actually been slaughtered. Yu and the others, on the other hand, were extremely excited and delighted. Only Xi's expression was still calm as he stood on the shaman spirit sacrificial altar. His body was ramrod straight like a pine tree that was rooted in the ground, and he didn't move at all. Actually, he could have killed Suolin right at the beginning of the battle. However, he hadn't done that and fought Suolin over and over again in order to determine exactly what was different about these heretics from the last era. Now, he had a rough evaluation of them in his heart. Next, Xi's gaze was like a bolt of lightning that swept through Arui's group, and his cold voice resounded through the heavens and the earth. "How arrogant!" Arui reproached coldly. "Cut the crap. Get up here and fight me if you're disgruntled." Xi's voice carried an arrogant and domineering tone as he spoke in a concise manner. Earlier, these heretics were swelling with pride and looked down upon all of them who were cultivators of the ancient god domain. Moreover, these heretics had successively imprisoned Kong Yuran, Yechan, and the others after mocking and ridiculing them to the extreme. So, at this moment, she was giving them an eye for an eye, and he was cleansing the humiliation they received while venting the hatred and resentment in his heart. "You're courting death. Do you think you're invincible just because you've grasped the energy of Terminus?" Before Arui could react, the snake-headed and scaled figure of that descendant of the Devil Howl Snake Shaman tribe, Long, had crushed through space and flashed swiftly onto the sacrificial altar. Bang! Long's figure shook before his arms instantly transformed into 2 3-kilometers-long whips that flowed with light and mysterious markings and flickered with a strange and horrifying aura of destruction. "Die!" he roared loudly as he attacked, and he utilized an extremely decisive attitude to display his resolution. In an instant, killing intent surged on the sacrificial altar. Whip! Whip! The whips danced through the sky like the chains of order that were in the hands of the ruler of the heavens. It struck through the world and destroyed everything in its path. The 3 kilometers-long whips that were formed from his arms revealed a scene of obliteration, as if it was the end of the world. Swoosh! She didn't dodge, and his display was even more domineering. The talisman armament soared through the sky and emanated violet gold sword chi that were boundlessly brilliant. All Suolin's attacks were destroyed by a single strike of his sword. "Devil Seal Domain! Crush!" Long roared loudly as he utilized his innate divine ability. He chanted while a strand of a terrifying black soundwave swept out, and it dyed the heavens and the earth pitch black. Once could clearly notice that this soundwave was condensed and didn't disperse. It utilized Long's arms as a frame to instantly form a black cage that was covered in bloodstains. Within the cage, the soundwave was like the roars of dragons, and it created all sorts of terrifying phenomena like the gods shedding tears of blood, the sages howling sorrowfully, and all things falling into chaos. This was the inner divine ability of the Devil Howl Snake Shaman tribe, the Devil Seal Domain. Arui and the others gasped when they witnessed this. This fellow, Long, has actually utilized an ultimate technique amongst his innate techniques as soon as the battle began. The Devil Seal Domain was a domain formed from sound waves, and the greater the number of enemies one killed, the strong the might of the domain would be. Up until now, Long had utilized the Devil Seal Domain to kill countless people, and he'd accumulated a huge amount of resentment, incomplete souls, and the blood of the gods. As soon as it was activated, it was obvious how terrifying it was. Bang! The black blood-stained domain rumbled as it descended along with world-shocking phenomena, and it intended to confine Xianxia within it. What sort of lousy technique is this? You dare to use such a technique in public? Break! With the experience he obtained during the battle with Suolin, Xianxia seemed to be extremely overbearing and domineering at this moment. He shouted loudly while violet gold light seethed from his body, and the talisman armament in his hand seemed like it was covered by a golden lake. It was like jade yet wasn't, and it was glistening, translucent, and carried supreme might. Swoosh! A wisp of sword chi shot out explosively. OM! A vast region appeared above Xianxia. The universes within it circulated while the stars glowed brightly. After that, the violet gold imperial sovereign star above his soul emanated brilliant radiance, and it improved his imposing aura to its limits. In the blink of an eye, Xianxia was like an ancient weapon that had its seal removed, and he emanated wave after wave of terrifying might. In the end, rumbling resounded as cracks appeared on the Devil Seal domain, and then it was slashed into two, causing a storm of bloody rain to descend as it collapsed completely. Pooh! The destruction of his innate divine ability caused Inglong to cough up a large mouthful of blood, and his figure staggered backward while his countenance had turned ghastly pale. He'd suffered a heavy injury because of the backlash. Swoosh! Xianxia wouldn't hesitate again, nor would he give Inglong a chance at all. As soon as he'd charged forward, he'd already slashed with the talisman armament, and a myriad of strands of sword chi flashed forward and were blasted at Inglong. No! Inglong was utterly horrified as he'd sensed the smell of death. How could he have imagined that even though he'd utilized his strongest attack upon stepping foot on the battlefield, he would still not be a match for Xianxia? Pooh! 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 In the end, Inglong was unable to evade and was annihilated amidst despair. His entire body was stabbed by the myriad of strands of sword chi to the point he seemed like a hornet's nest. He was a body refiner as well, but he was clearly not as lucky as Suoling. Xianxia didn't give him any chance to revive himself before he was directly killed, and then his entire body and all his thoughts were utterly obliterated and transformed into nothingness. Obviously, Xianxia had utilized the energy of Terminus in this attack as well. At this point, the third formidable existence amongst the ancient shamans had been annihilated. The surroundings were perfectly silent while the atmosphere was oppressive to the point of being suffocating. Compared to when he killed Suolin, Inglong had undoubtedly been defeated too quickly. Yingling had merely stepped foot onto the battlefield, executed his innate divine ability, and then he was annihilated on the spot. It was swift to the point that the spectators were simply unable to recover from their shock. All of this made Xianxia's combat strength seem even more shocking. He was simply like an all-powerful and unparalleled god of war that was unstoppable wherever he pointed his sword towards. This was shocking, and it caused the expressions of Erui and the others to become solemn. If Lai Fulua was said to have died from his carelessness, then no matter if it was Suolin or Yingling, they'd been completely crushed by Xianxia in a head-on battle. As ancient shamans who were body refiners, they possessed a recovery that deemed them practically unkillable. Yet they'd completely lost this advantage in the face of the energy of Terminus that Xianxia possessed. Next, amidst the extremely deathly silent surroundings, Xianxia spoke indifferently once more. He was domineering and arrogant, and he was doing just as he'd said. He intended to annihilate all the heretics that were standing before him. How arrogant! Erui and the others gritted their teeth with gloomy expressions, and their gazes were filled with fury as they stared at Xianxia. At this moment, they were completely infuriated by Xianxia's overbearing and domineering attitude as well. What? All of you've gone mute? Or are all of you heretics afraid? Said Xianxia in an extremely cold tone. These words were simply like a form of humiliation to Erui and the others, since when had existences which they thought to be lowly prey dared to casually ridicule them. Let me fight him. Yingluan stepped forward. Her slender and delicate figure glowed and emanated strands of silver droplets of light that rained down around her. Yingluan stepped back. Allow me to annihilate that kid. Another black-robed figure roared in a deep voice, and the clothes he wore were suddenly incinerated to reveal a figure that seemed as if it was made of iron and had a metallic sheen. Tae-1, it's better if I'm the one who fights him. This kid has refined and absorbed 9 region quintessences, and he possesses the energy of Terminus, and that's exactly what I like. Once I kill him, it'll allow me to absorb even more flawless shaman energy of destruction. At practically the exact same time, another black-robed figure had stepped forward and spoke with an icy cold and sharp voice. These lowly ants actually dared to threaten the annihilation of our ancient shaman line. They deserve death. The other black-robed figure spoke as well. Obviously, they'd been utterly infuriated and were unable to remain indifferent as they had just now. Xianxia seemed to have directly disregarded this, and he didn't say anything else. He repeated the same word in an indifferent manner. Next, this sort of attitude, words, and tone became the most unforgivable form of provocation in the opinions of Arui and the others, and it caused the killing intent within the to surge and be on the verge of going out of control. On the other hand, Shiryu and the others heaved sighs of relief and were extremely excited. Since the battles had begun, their side had been defeated in succession, and their companions had fallen to the miserable fate of being captured. So they were extremely aggrieved in their hearts. Now, Xianxia had won 3 battles in succession, and it was simply like Xianxia had dispelled the clouds to allow sunlight to hit their faces. It swept away the misfortune and depression they experienced, and it caused their blood to boil. The corners of Arui's mouth twitched imperceptibly while a cold glow radiated from his eyes. He stopped hesitating and made a decision. Arui took a deep breath and forcefully restrained the flames of rage in his heart before he said in a low voice, "Yingluan, you go capture that bastard." Yingluan replied with an emotionless expression. "I was waiting for you to say that." Her clothes fluttered as she strode forward, and her entire body emanated dazzling silver light. She was like a bright moon that had descended to the world, and she emanated an inviolable and horrifying imposing aura. "Kill him!" The other black-robed ancient shamans shouted loudly. They wanted Yingluan to swiftly annihilate Xianxia. Yingluan's status amongst the ancient shamans was clearly very high because many ancient shamans revealed excited expressions when they saw her ascend the battlefield. Xianxia stood on the shaman spirit sacrificial altar, and he watched silently with a piercingly cold and deep gaze as the silver-haired woman approached. Earlier, Yu Jihui had lost at her hands. Her combat strength was extremely formidable, and Yu Jihui was already unable to shake her while she was merely fighting barehanded. In the end, Yu Jihui was injured at the center of his forehead after they'd exchanged just 300 blows, and he was crushed and imprisoned. At this moment, as far as Xianxia was concerned, Yingluan was slightly stronger than Suolin, Lai Fulua, and Yinglong. Yingluan strode through space while her slender figure was covered by silver divine radiance, and it made her seem dazzling, resplendent, divine, and dignified while her imposing aura was extremely terrifying. Along with every step she took, space rumbled and exploded into pieces as well. Moreover, numerous silver flowers floated out from the heavens and the earth, and they seemed like numerous bright moons that were illuminating the world. Unlike when she fought Yu Jihui just now, Yingluan had clearly revealed her true might at this moment. Supreme phenomena had appeared just from her actions of striding over, and it was like a terrifying and eternal expert was emerging from the annals of time. Only a prey like you would be interesting to kill. Unfortunately, your destiny conflict my own, so I can only confine you and allow you to be used by another. As soon as she ascended the sacrificial altar, Yingluan had spoken immediately with a clear, cold, and indifferent voice that was neither fast nor slow. She seemed as if she was speaking about an extremely ordinary matter. A wisp of an incomprehensible arc arose on the corners of Xianxia's mouth. Destiny? Even the great figures of the world are unable to deduce my destiny? But this woman says that my destiny conflicts her? How laughable! Xianxia, be careful. This woman is a royal amongst the ancient shamans, and she possesses holy blood. She definitely possesses inconceivable and supreme divine abilities, Suddenly, Jianan spoke with a solemn expression on his face, and he seemed to have determined something from Yingluan. A descendant of the royals amongst the ancient shaman? Xianxia's eyes narrowed because merely the fact that she was a royal allowed him to realize how extraordinary she was. Humph, monk. I never expected that you know even more than I expected. Yes, Yingluan is from the Holy Moon royal clan, and she possesses one of the loftiest royal surnames, the Yunlan Ing clan. During the last era, even the eternal clans in the imperial region are unable to compare with her status. Arui laughed coldly while his voice carried a wisp of pride. The Yunlaning clan. She's actually a descendant of the supreme overlord of the last era, Holy King Yunlan. Jianan's expression changed slightly while his voice carried a wisp of seriousness. All of this allowed Xianxia to realize that Yingluan's origins were probably much greater than he'd imagined. However, all of these were secrets of the last era, and they were too insubstantial to Xianxia and weren't able to make him feel much shock. The glory of the past has passed in the end. No matter how formidable Holy King Yunlan was, he was obliterated during the last era. Xianxia spoke indifferently as he wasn't one to be terrified by an insubstantial rumor. Many black-robed ancient shamans berated. How audacious! It was very obvious that Holy Shaman Yunlan's name carried special meaning amongst these ancient shamans, and they wouldn't tolerate any disrespect. Xianxia's words was a form of extreme disrespect. Just because of those words, you'll definitely pay with your life today. A silver glow erupted from Yingluan's eyes, and her eyes were icy cold and bone-piercing. Bang! Her voice hadn't finished resounding when she'd taken a step forward. Her figure was murderous. Her imposing aura was fierce and sharp, and seemingly material killing intent transformed into a silver ocean of flowers that smashed down towards Xianxia. Her attacks were direct and decisive, and she revealed an oppressive and dignified aura as she attacked. Moreover, her palms actually carried a brilliant moon and starry sky that possessed terrifying might. Swoosh! Xianxia held the talisman armament in hand as he went head-on against her attack. As his figure teleported, it was like he was a rock that was soaring into the sky. He carried the aura of the wind and ocean as he flew through the surroundings, crushing the stars, and displayed boundless might. It was the rock divine technique. A wave of world-shocking sonic booms resounded, and they blasted Yingluan's attacks into pieces, causing boundless dazzling light to sweep towards the surroundings. Arui's eyes suddenly narrowed as he recognized the rock divine technique that Xianxia was utilizing. He recalled that the rock Downlord had once been trapped beneath the grand abyss of catastrophe and suffered misfortune a very long time ago. However, the rock Downlord had relied on the innate divine ability he possessed to forcefully escape the grand abyss of catastrophe and return to the ancient god domain in the end. Even though the rock Downlord was unable to deal with the Tao restraint tribulation energy that covered him and had perished in the end, he'd become the first existence since the ancient times to have escaped the grand abyss of catastrophe. The thing he'd relied to accomplish this was exactly the rock divine technique. So, when Arui recognized to his shock that the technique Xianxia was utilizing was the rock divine technique, he couldn't avoid feeling slightly surprised and bewildered. Could it be that this fellow is related to the rock Downlord? Clang! After executing this attack, Yingluan hadn't hesitated to withdraw a silver spear that emanated a sharp glow. Moreover, it revealed the diagram of a brilliant moon that was boundlessly resplendent. This caused Xianxia's heart to shake. In an instant, he'd noticed that the spear was extremely extraordinary, and it possessed unfathomable might. Since you dared to be disrespectful to my ancestor, then you must atone for it with your life. The space in the surroundings exploded into pieces as Yingluan strode through it, and then strands of absolutely sharp light appeared while carrying monstrous killing intent. In an instant, the spear howled and shook, and it caused even the heavens and the earth to dim down and warp before it. He's just a bastard that has perished for an era. His glory has passed for a long time. The world doesn't belong to all of you heretics anymore. Xianxia spoke coldly with a calm expression, and he wasn't fearful at all. You're courting death. Yingluan was furious. The spear in her palm tore through the sky and stabbed ferociously at Xianxia. Rumble. In an instant, the bright silver images of that spear covered the sky. It was like the brilliant moon in the sky had emanated silver light that rained down from above, and they were around 100,000 in number and emanating imposing auras that were terrifying to the extreme. This attack was truly terrifying. It wasn't something that an ordinary attack could compare to, and it was a supreme ability. It was the embodiment of unparalleled divine might. Suddenly, as Xianxia's talisman armament spun, a completely round barrier of the sword appeared around him. The profound heart sword technique, impeccable style. However, unlike in the past, the impeccable style had grown even more flawless after Xianxia attained the 4th level of the Sword Emperor realm. The completely round barrier of the sword was suffused with violet gold energy. Moreover, the sun and moon alternated. A myriad of stars circulated, and numerous talismans markings and laws interweaved together within it to reveal all sorts of grand scenes. Bang! 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 The silver images the spear descended onto the completely round barrier of the sword, and they caused dense sounds of collision to resound like the dense sounds of a drum. Numerous silver spear images were shattered into powder and vanished without a trace. However, even more were constantly descending. They were dazzling and resplendent. They were like brilliant moons that were descending to the earth while emanating boundless killing intent. Bang! In the end, the completely round barrier of the sword started to tremble violently and seemed to be on the verge of breaking into pieces. Many of the black-robed ancient shamans revealed cold smiles when they saw this, and they started shouting loudly. Good! Kill that kid! This kid could be said to have died a good death by perishing beneath the supreme grand divine ability of the royal Yunlan clan, Moon's Glow. However, the development of the battle exceeded everyone's expectations. Even until the end, Xianxia's barrier of the sword hadn't been destroyed. On the contrary, along with an extremely ear-piercing howl of the sword, a shocking silver glow shot out explosively from it, and it caused many to feel a piercing pain in their eyes. Bang! In the next moment, the completely round barrier of the light had transformed into an extremely condensed and dazzling silver sword light that suddenly erupted like a big bang in the universe. All of Ying Luan's attacks were crushed and obliterated by this attack. Shit! This fellow's defense from before had actually fully swallowed the energy of my attack before releasing it once more. Ying Luan's pupils constricted. She finally understood that the barrier of the sword wasn't unable to hold on just now, and it was clearly working hard to deal with her attack and swallow the energy within her attacks. However, her realization was a step too late. The silver sword light didn't just contain Xianxia's strength, it even contained the strength of her attack from before. At this moment, when they were converged together and assaulted her, the might it possessed was simply unimaginable. Pooh! In an instant, Ying Luan was blasted flying. Blood seeped out from the corners of her mouth while her entire body suddenly started trembling, and she almost fell to the ground. How could this be possible? The figures of Arui and the others stiffened. What? Sure, you and the others who were originally worried about Xianxia were instantly dumbstruck by this scene. You dared to brag when you only possessed such little ability? No wonder that your clansmen would have been obliterated during the last era. Ying Luan was undoubtedly formidable to the extreme. However, when she heard such ridicule from Xianxia, her face fell, and she gritted her teeth as she attacked once more with her strongest ability. Swoosh! This time it was Xianxia who attacked first. The talisman armament soared through the sky as he slashed with it. He revealed an arrogant and imposing aura, and he seemed to be domineering to the extreme. Kill! Ying Luan waved the silver speak in her hand, and it carried surging radiance of the moon as it blasted an extremely terrifying attack towards Xianxia. However, all of this was unable to obstruct Xianxia's attack. Every single time he swung the talisman armament, he would obliterate Ying Luan's attack, and he simply seemed to be all-powerful. Bang! In the end, Ying Luan was unable to withstand him. She was crushed once more, and her entire body was bathed in blood while her pretty face had turned ghastly pale. How could this be possible? At this moment, Ying Luan finally felt a trace of terror. She felt that this opponent of hers was too terrifying, and she'd only noticed that his combat strength was much more shocking than she'd imagined after she actually fought him. Bang! After a short moment, Ingluan was defeated. Her entire body flowed incessantly with blood. Her hair was disheveled, and her countenance was ghastly pale. She didn't seem dignified and divine at all anymore. Looks like you're going to vanish completely from this world, just like your ancestor. Amidst his piercingly cold and indifferent voice, Xianxia was like an imperial sovereign of the sword as he strode towards her, and the talisman armament in his palm emanated peerlessly dazzling violet gold light. He'd decided to end the battle with this attack. Bastard! Your companions will definitely die if you dare to kill Ingluan. Right at this moment, Arui's extremely cold voice suddenly resounded. Xianxia swiftly turned his head towards Arui, and he saw that Arui had suddenly arrived before Kong Yuran, Yechen, Yu Jihui, and Zhao Qingyao who'd been captured just now. Arui held a sword in his hand, and he pointed the sword at Kong Yuran and the others in an extremely threatening manner. They really haven't died. However, Xianxia felt a sense of relief in his heart when he witnessed this scene. He'd finally confirmed that it was just as he'd guessed. Kong Yuran and the others hadn't really died yet. After Kong Yuran, Yechen, Zhao Qingyao, and Yu Jihui were crushed and captured, they'd been locked up in cages, and their fates were unknown. According to Arui, he intended to wait for everything to come to an end before they were to act and seize the destiny of these cultivators from the ancient god domain. The so-called action of seizing the destiny that they spoke of was to seize the divine Tao laws, essence, spirit, energy, and even bodies of the cultivators from the ancient god domain. However, at that time, Xianxia and the others were utterly unable to determine whether Kong Yuran and the others were dead or alive. At this moment, when they heard Arui use their lives as a threat, Xianxia finally dared to ascertain that Kong Yuran and the others were really alive. This was undoubtedly a piece of good news to him. However, under such circumstances, this good news couldn't be considered as a pleasant surprise at all, because he only lacked a single attack before he could kill Ingluan. So, being threatened at a time like this was undoubtedly extremely bad for the following battles that Xianxia would be participating in. In the end, Xianxia gave up on launching that final strike, and he just gazed coldly at Arui as he said, "Are you sure you want to threaten me?" His voice was calm and without any fluctuations of emotion. However, it caused a trace of fear to arise in the hearts of Arui and the others when they heard it. But right after that, Arui chuckled and said, "No, this isn't a threat. It's just a form of exchange." He paused for a moment before he continued. "You ought to have noticed that I haven't really killed your companions. Under such circumstances, your actions of killing these subordinates of mine can't be justified at all." Xianxia's eyes narrowed as he said, "So, your conditions of exchange are that regardless of the outcome of the battle, I can't kill any of you bastards?" Bastards! Arui's eyelids couldn't help but twitched when he heard this term, and then he said with an emotionless expression, "Yes, if you're unable to do it, then I can only kill these companions of yours." How despicable! According to the rules of the Shaman Spirit Battle domain, the winning side can only leave the domain after life and death is determined. If we do as you've said, then when would we be able to decide the final outcome? When they heard Arui's threats, both Shiryu and Qin Xinhui revealed furious expressions, and they gnashed their teeth with hatred while they couldn't help but shout loudly. They felt that this fellow was truly too despicable. Not only had he interrupted Xianxia's attack at the critical moment, he'd even used the lives of Kong Yuran and the others to threaten Xianxia. They simply felt that he was shameless to the extreme. Arui was completely indifferent towards this, and he said slowly, "Don't worry. Life and death will definitely be decided at the end of the battles." Sure, you couldn't help but ask, what if Xianxia is defeated during one of the following battles? He'll naturally be killed. Arui answered without the slightest hesitation, and then he couldn't help but laugh. Don't forget that there's absolutely no need for fairness in these battles. If we wanted to kill all of you, then we could have annihilated all of you a long time ago in the outside world. Then, how could all of you even have had such a chance? His voice was neither fast nor slow, and he spoke in a composed and calm manner. However, when his words entered into Yu's words, it was clearly detestable and shameless. It was simply despicable to the extreme. It was even to the extent that it angered them to the point they were unable to speak. They can kill Xianxia, yet Xianxia can't kill them? They're fucking going too far. All right, I agree. Xianxia, who'd remained silent until now, had spoken abruptly. And he stopped Yu and the others with his gaze and signaled that there was no need to speak further. Xianxia was very clearly aware that it was utterly useless to say anything else when facing these extremely despicable heretic bastards. Haha! This decision is very wise. Arui clapped and roared with laughter. He felt indescribably delighted when he saw Xianxia and the others being aggrieved and compliant like this. However, in the next moment he wasn't able to laugh anymore. Bang! Xianxia's figure suddenly flashed on the sacrificial altar, and his palm was like a bolt of lightning that caught Luan off guard, caught Luan by the throat, and forcefully lifted her up. Xianxia! You! Arui exploded with rage as he thought Xianxia was about to go back on his word. Bang! Xianxia tossed casually and tossed Luan to Yu's side like he was tossing a piece of trash. Xianxia spoke swiftly via voice transmission. Keep an eye on her. We'll use her life in exchange for Kong Yuran and the others later. At this moment, Yu and the others finally understood Xianxia's intentions. Obviously, he intended to give them a taste of their own medicine by restraining these ancient shamans and preventing Arui from acting rashly. Even though Arui was both shocked and infuriated when he witnessed this scene, he still heaved a sigh of relief in the end. In his opinion, it was fine so long as Luan was still alive. Luan was crushed and captured in this battle. Presently, she was already the fourth ancient shaman who'd lost to Xianxia. However, unlike Luan, the other three had perished and transformed into nothingness. So, it was impossible for them to be resurrected anymore. No matter what, this string of unexpected events was definitely a heavy blow to Arui's group. They were very clearly aware that Xianxia had refined and absorbed 9 region quintessences, and they were well aware that Xianxia possessed the energy of Terminus. However, it just so happened that the experts of their side had been successively defeated by Xianxia. It wasn't that they weren't strong, and it was because Xianxia's combat strength was immeasurable instead. In next to no time, Xianxia's cold, indifferent, and emotionless voice resounded again. It was like a sound that pushed others to their death. It caused Arui and the others to be furious while their dignity suffered a form of unprecedented provocation, but they felt even more terror in their hearts because of it. Earlier, Xianxia had said the word, next, on more than one occasion. At that time, many ancient shamans had sneered at it, and they felt that Xianxia was ignorant, arrogant, and courting death. But now it was different. After 4 consecutive battles had ended with Xianxia's victory, could any one of them dare to underestimate him when such an impressive achievement in battle was right before their eyes? He's absolutely a terrifying cultivator. The ancient shaman that possessed a body that seemed as if it was made of iron and had a metallic sheen gritted his teeth as he spoke in a ghastly tone. Damn it! This prey has been provoking us repeatedly, and he doesn't take us seriously at all. He truly deserves to be tortured to death. He'd wanted to make a move against Xianxia since the beginning, but he was clearly slightly hesitant now and rather fearful of Xianxia. Even Luan, who was a descendant of Holy King Yunlan, had been crushed, and it had terrified many of the ancient shamans here. All of them just keep talking nonsense yet don't dare to ascend the battlefield. They've obviously been scared out of their wits. Yu laughed with ridicule from afar, and he mocked them without holding back at all. After he'd confirmed that Kong Yuran and the others weren't dead and coupled with Xianxia's successive victories, Yu's spirits were greatly raised, and he wasn't so stifled as he was just now. When they heard such ridicule, the expressions of those ancient shamans instantly grew even gloomier. We've been provoked by an existence that's like an ant. Could it be that all of you're really afraid? Arui's face fell while strands of black mist effused out from his entire body. He was like a demon god of darkness, and his tone was icy cold and indifferent. He hadn't flared up, but he caused all of them to shudder incessantly with fear. The expressions of the other ancient shamans changed indeterminately. "I'll fight him." A black-robed figure stepped forward, and then his figure actually transformed to a monster that was 6 m tall, robust like a mountain, had ferocious fangs, and double pupils that were blood-red. A pitch-black, thick, and large chain was coiled around his arm, while a bloody necklace that was made of bones hung from his neck. Coupled with his hideous appearance, his imposing aura became extremely terrifying, and he was like a demon lord that had come from beneath the abyss. Especially his pair of blood-red double pupils. They revealed the scene of a mountain of corpses and an ocean of blood that flickered within his double pupils. It was simply like hell itself was reflected in his blood-red double pupils. An expert. Xianxia swept this ancient shaman with his gaze but wasn't afraid. Even though he knew that his opponent was probably even more formidable than Ingluan, he still remained calm and composed. A descendant of the Blood-Eye Devil shamans. Jianan frowned and spoke quickly via voice transmission. "Xianxia, this fellow's origins are extraordinary. He possesses an inconceivably terrifying divine ability, the Chains of Destruction, and it contained the profundities of the Destruction Shaman Dao of the last era. You must be careful. It's impossible for you to recover once the shaman energy of destruction invades your body." The Destruction Shaman Dao? Xianxia's eyes narrowed. When they saw this ancient shaman with a hideous appearance and the physique of a demon god step forward, the others seemed to heave sighs of relief and reveal relaxed expressions. They seemed to feel that there was no need to worry once this ancient shaman headed to battle. Only Arui frowned and said, "Rui 1, you alone are not enough." The other ancient shamans were instantly stunned. "He's not enough?" Could it be that Lord Arui thinks that even a descendant of the Blood-Eye Devil shamans that possesses the greatest destructive ability, Rui 1, is unable to do anything to Xianxia? Even Sure Yu and the others were slightly surprised. They seemed to have never imagined that Arui would actually act so cautiously at this moment instead of being arrogant as he was before this. The ancient shaman called Rui when said in a low voice, "Lord Arui, could it be that you're looking down upon me?" Arui shook his head and said indifferently, "I'm not looking down upon you. It's because we absolutely can't underestimate Xianxia at a time like this." As he spoke, he raised his hand and pointed at a black-clothed figure at the side. "Baizha, kill that kid with Rui 1. As soon as Arui finished speaking, Xianxia instantly frowned. "Two together? How despicable! According to the rules, only one-on-one battles can be carried out on the sacrificial altar. Could it be that you intend to break the rules?" Sure Yu couldn't restrain himself and roared loudly in a fierce voice. Meanwhile, the black-robed figure called Baizha accept his orders. He slowly removed the cloak that he wore, removed the black robe that covered him, and then stretched his entire body before he nodded and said, "Since Lord Arui is so cautious and careful, then there's no reason for I, Baizha, to refuse." Baizha was a handsome young man that possessed golden hair that was brilliant like the sun. His skin was fair like jade, and an innocent smile hung from the corners of his mouth. He seemed to be extremely innocent, and he didn't seem like an expert at all. However, when he saw Baizha step forward, the slightly displeased descendant of the Blood-Eye Devil shamans, Rui 1, instantly shut his mouth. "Break the rules of the shaman spirit battle domain? Haha, you truly think highly of me." Meanwhile, Arui seemed to be reassured, and he chuckled lightly. "Open your eyes wide and have a look. They aren't two people that are joining the battle together." As he spoke, Baizha suddenly started laughing as well, and then his figure flashed and actually transformed into a ray of white light that charged swiftly into Rui 1. Bang! In an instant, an extremely terrifying strand of pure white flames surged out explosively from Rui 1's body, and it shot into the sky and incinerated the surrounding space into nothingness. At the same time, a head actually grew out from Rui 1's thick shoulder. This head had a handsome appearance, brilliant gold hair, and a smile on the corners of its mouth. Surprisingly, it was Baizha. When looked at from afar, it was like Rui 1 had two heads. One had ferocious fangs, a pair of blood-red double pupils, a hideous appearance, and was like a demon god. The other was handsome, holy, innocent, and emanated a pure aura. They were like twin stars that represented good and evil, and they shared a single body. Moreover, their auras had actually fused flawlessly with each other without conflicting at all. On the contrary, they echoed in cooperation with each other, causing the imposing aura of the entire body to rise explosively. Shiryu was instantly stunned when he witnessed such a bizarre scene, and he finally understood why Arui had spoken those words from before. Two ancient shamans had actually instantly fused into one. Moreover, it wasn't a simple form of fusing together. If one wasn't aware that they had two separate bodies before this, one would wonder if Rui 1 and Baizhi had been a single person since the beginning and just had two different souls. This was extremely inconceivable, and it was even more bizarre and terrifying that the merging technique that spread through the ancient god domain. Even Chun she couldn't help but be slightly surprised when he witnessed this scene. He was able to sense that Rui 1 and Baizhi's strengths had fused into one as if they were a single entity. However, it just so happened that they weren't just a single person, and it was extremely strange and mysterious. But right after that, Chun she laughed coldly and said, "I never expected that you heretic bastards would be able to play such tricks. This is fine as well. One or two I'll still kill them all. So, there isn't any difference at all." Arui and the others glared angrily at Chun Shi, and their eyes emanated killing intent. This fellow is really growing more and more arrogant. Could it be that he thinks he can continue winning? Haha, what an interesting prey. Lord Arui, let me notify you in advance. If we kill this bastard, then his destiny will belong to me, Baizhi. Baizhi's head chuckled, and then it turned to look at Rui Wen, who was right beside him. Do you have any objections? Rui Wen's hideous face grunted coldly, and then he lightly spat out a single word from between his lips. No! Good! Baizhi roared with laughter. In the next moment, their robust figure that was large like a god of demons strode forward. Bang! Bang! Every single step they took caused an expanse of white flames that seemed like lava to seethe, and it incinerated the space beneath their feet, causing black holes to appear and ceaselessly spread towards the surroundings. The destruction created by them was shocking to the extreme. When they stepped foot onto the sacrificial altar, their imposing aura was seething to the extreme. It was shocking to the point the world dimmed in comparison and the surrounding were thrown into disorder. It was a scene of chaos. You really are a monster that's neither human nor demon. Chun she ridiculed in an extremely cold voice when he witnessed this. Just these words alone caused the expressions of Arui and the others to freeze while flames of rage blazed in their hearts. This damnable bastard simply can't be forgiven. Kill! At this moment, Baizhi and Rui Wen didn't waste their breaths, and they roared furiously as they pounced towards Chun Shi. Bang! Rui Wen's eyes opened up before an expanse of blood-red divine light erupted from within them. It was like a crimson cloud that was soaring into the sky, and it was like a blood offering was flowing and destroying everything. The space here was destroyed. It was heavily damaged to the point of being unable to recover, and a scene of great destruction and collapse appeared here. Chun Shi's eyes narrowed. This is the strength of the destruction shaman Dao. It really is as Jianan said. Once something is destroyed by the destruction shaman Dao, it's unable to recover anymore. However, Chun Shi wasn't afraid. He released the region within him as he stood there, and his violet gold imperial sovereign star illuminated him from above. After that, it instantly transformed into a halo of the grand Tao that surged with divine light and was invulnerable to all techniques. It was a halo formed from the energy of Terminus. Swoosh! At the same time, Chun Shi held the talisman armament in his hand as his figure swiftly vanished on the spot. In the next moment, he'd arrived in front of his opponent, and he slashed down with his sword. Bang! Rui Wen's blood-red divine light was forcefully slashed apart by Chun Shi's attack, causing its force to disperse towards the sides. However, before Chun Shi could complete this attack, Baizhi had suddenly shouted loudly, "Restrain!" In an instant, Rui Wen's figure transformed into a seething ocean of white lava. It incinerated the world as it formed a white tempestuous wave that shot through the sky. It was an extremely shocking sight. When looked at from afar, it was like an ocean of white lava was sweeping through the 9 heavens. On the other hand, Xianxia was instantly trapped within the surging ocean, and he suffered an omnidirectional attack from the white wave of fire. The white lava transformed into an ocean of flames that incinerated the room, and it blazed terrifyingly. Rumble. Waves swept up into the sky and charged ferociously at Xianxia from all directions. The expressions of Shi Yu and the others changed. Even Xianxia was slightly surprised because he hadn't imagined that the joined forces of Rui 1 and Baizhi would possess such shocking might. It was actually impossible to find a trace of them. Bang! Xianxia's sword light was peerless, and it blasted onto the wave of lava with everything it had, causing monstrous waves shot up into the air. Even though he was unable to escape the ocean of flames, he wasn't trapped and suppressed by it. "Get the fuck out here!" Xianxia shouted loudly while he slashed swiftly with the talisman armament. His brought forth the might of the Sword Emperor Realm's 4th level to its limits, and he simply seemed as if he intended to mince the lava into pieces. Swish! Suddenly, 2 thick and large pitch-black chains soared into the sky. They were suffused with a mysterious and strange glow as they instantly enveloped this area, and then Xianxia's entire body was surrounded by them. It was the Chains of Destruction, a grand divine technique passed down from the ancestors of the Blood-Eye Devil Shamans, and it was capable of destroying all things. Such a divine ability possessed inconceivable abilities of destruction, and coming into slight contact with it would cause one to suffer lethal destruction that was impossible to repair. It was extremely terrifying. Bang! Unfortunately, it had encountered Xianxia. As soon as the 2 chains of destruction had coiled around the space in Xianxia's surroundings, they were blocked by a violet gold-colored halo. The halo enveloped Xianxia, and it was formed from the energy of Terminus. In merely an instant, the energy of destruction and the energy of Terminus had collided, and they caused terrifying storms of energy to sweep towards the surroundings. The spectators could clearly notice that the chains of destruction were actually breaking and collapsing inch by inch before transforming into nothingness. Obviously, in terms of the might of the Grand Tao, the energy of destruction wasn't a match for the energy of Terminus at all. It was unable to compare to Terminus at all. This caused Arui and the others to be horrified, and they had a deeper understanding of how terrifying Terminus was. It had completely exceeded their imagination. Even Shi Yu and the others couldn't help but be astounded. No wonder the energy of Terminus is seen as a taboo. It really is heaven-defying to the point that even the Heaven Tao is unable to tolerate it. Kill! Xianxia's imposing aura grew even stronger. The divine halo of Terminus circled around his body while violet gold energy seethed and enshrouded his entire body. He seemed like a peerless and invincible exalt of the sword that could sweep through the world with a single strike of the sword. In next to no time, the white ocean of lava rumbled and exploded into pieces. It was completely obliterated and vanished. At the same time, the body that was shared by Rui 1 and Baizhi had appeared. They staggered back without end while their expressions changed indeterminately. Obviously, they'd similarly never imagined that their joint forces would actually be unable to harm Xianxia as well. Bang! At this moment, Xianxia didn't waste his breath at all. He moved with profound footwork while his figure was like a rock, and his sword was like a torrent that slashed through the universe. Such might seemed peerless, boundless, and world-shocking. Pooh! It wasn't long before Rui 1 and Baizhi were heavily injured. Their entire bodies were heavily wounded, and blood flowed incessantly from them. In the end, they were crushed by Xianxia amidst a wave of disgruntled and furious shrill cries, and they were captured alive. Shi Yu, keep an eye on them. As soon as he attained victory, Xianxia seemed as if he'd accomplished an extremely ordinary deed. He kicked both Rui 1 and Baizhi off the shaman spirit sacrificial altar, and they were jointly restrained by Shi Yu and the others. The joint forces of Rui 1 and Baizhi had been crushed. When this battle came to an end, the expressions of Arui and the others was gloomy to the extreme. Their faces were filled with extreme disbelief, surprise, and bewilderment. How could this be possible? How could he be so strong? That was the joint forces of Rui 1 and Bai Zhe. Yet they were actually unable to do anything against a fellow that just advanced into the ranks of region lords. Arui and the others were unable to figure it out no matter how they racked their brains. The atmosphere was deathly silent. Since the battle had begun, Chen Shi's side had suffered 4 successive losses, and 4 of their companions had been caged up. However, Chen Shi had never lost since the 5th battle began. Lai Fulua, Suo Lin, and Ing Long had been killed, whereas Ing Luan, Bai Zhe, and Rui Wen were captured. Their losses were so huge that it was even heavier than the losses of Chen Shi's side. Next, Chen Shi stood upright on the sacrificial altar while he revealed a cold, indifferent, and merciless expression. His familiar voice drifted through the heavens and the earth, but it seemed so ear-piercing to Arui and the others, causing their expressions to turn even gloomier. It wasn't the first time that this word had entered their ears, but the meaning represented by this word had been completely different every single time it resounded. At this point in the battles, this word represented a form of absolute confidence and the resolution to sweep through all enemies by himself. This caused Arui and the others to feel infuriated and extremely humiliated. Their dignity suffered a form of unprecedented trampling. All of you go challenge him one by one. Even if you're unable to defeat that bastard, you'll still be able to exhaust his strength. There's no need to worry even if all of you are really unable to defeat him in the end, because he wouldn't dare to kill all of you while we have these hostages. Arui took a deep breath and forcefully calmed himself before he spoke swiftly via voice transmission to the other ancient shamans. As for me, I'll head into battle at the most suitable time and annihilate that kid in one go to put an end to these battles. As he finished speaking, his voice carried a wisp of hatred and killing intent. The other ancient shamans were stunned. After that, a wisp of a resolute expression flashed on their faces while they nodded in agreement. They seemed to not doubt Arui at all, and this indirectly displayed that they possessed absolute confidence towards Arui's strength and decisions. Indeed, they'd lost repeatedly during the last few battles, but it wasn't the end of everything, and the final outcome was still unknown. Bang! A black-robed figure strode forward. He was thin like a spear, had a pair of hark eyes, green hair, and a pair of golden wings. He was a descendant of the Goldfeather Wind Shamans, Een Ruffing. Swoosh! Een Ruffing's figure was like a bolt of lightning, and he executed his movement technique as soon as he arrived on the sacrificial altar. His golden wings were suffused with brilliance as he flickered and teleported indeterminately through space. His speed was extremely and inconceivably swift like a bolt of lightning. He swiftly dodged and evaded after executing every single attack, and he seemed to not be seeking success but to avoid any mishaps. Obviously, Een Ruffing's strategy was extremely simple. He'd adopted an evasive strategy to fight a battle of attrition with Chen Shi. Een Ruffing's innate divine ability was called Ethereal Wind Shaman. It was a supreme movement technique that made him impossible to be tracked by relying on one's gaze alone, and it was even to the extent that one's will was unable to lock onto him as well. Because he was too swift. He was swift beyond imagination. This made Een Ruffing's confidence in battle to multiple. As far as he was concerned, even if he was unable to go head-on against Chen Shi, no one would be able to do anything to him if he were to take up evasive measures. Even Arui couldn't help but nod to himself when he witnessed this scene. He knew that such a strategy was undoubtedly the wisest choice. Unfortunately, Een Ruffing had miscalculated this time because his opponent was unlike his opponents of the past. Indeed, Chen Shi was unable to lock onto Een Ruffing by relying solely on his eyes or will. However, Chen Shi had another mysterious force that was inherited from the river diagram fragments, the Dao Seal mark. Not to mention Een Ruffing's body, even his aura and will were clearly detected and locked onto under the detection of the Dao Seal mark. Bang! So, not long after the battle had begun, Chen Shi grabbed an opportunity and slashed with his sword. It surged and raged with formidable might, and it crushed all obstacles before finally blasting onto Een Ruffing. Bang! Een Ruffing seemed as if he'd been struck by lightning. A bloody hole was torn open on his chest, and his body had actually been forcefully nailed to the ground by that wisp of sword chi. Too weak. Xianxia lightly spat out 2 words, and then he stretched out his hand and grabbed. He grabbed Dean Ruffing and tossed him over to be restrained by Shiryu and the others. This battle had actually ended in a short moment. At this moment, Arui and the others weren't shocked anymore, and they even felt a form of terror. They stared fixedly at Xianxia with their eyes wide open, and they still didn't dare believe their eyes. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, we have 4 prisoners already. Coupled with those 3 bastards that were killed, an entire 7 have lost to Xianxia. Shiryu spoke slowly from afar, and his voice carried a wisp of pleasure. Obviously, he was provoking and humiliating the Arui's group. I'll do it. This time, an ancient shaman was unable to restrain his rage before Xianxia could even speak, and he headed to battle in anger. This was a strange living being whose entire body seemed like flowing water. It seemed as if his body was condensed from water, and it was extremely mysterious. He was a descendant of the Grand Radiance Water Shamans, by Mukin. His body was completely formed from an energy of the shaman Dao called Sin Water, and he was extremely difficult to annihilate like the endless flow of water. Rumble. By Mukin transformed into a vortex of water that crushed through space and emanated a terrifying aura as it swept through the sacrificial altar. Bang! In merely an instant, it was blasted apart by Xianxia's sword chi, and his figure transformed into a myriad of water droplets. But in next to no time, they fused together once more, and then he continued his assault. It was rather inconceivable. This achieved the same effect as the undying fire shaman Lai Fulua, but it was accomplished via different means. Both of them didn't possess much offensive ability yet were unfathomable. Damnable prey. Once out plans are executed smoothly, the entire ancient god domain will be reduced to the place where the calamity of the last days descends. All cultivators will prostrate themselves beneath the feet of us ancient shamans while we wield absolute power over them. They'll be lowly like dogs and pigs. Mukin tried to disturb Xianxia's mental state as he attacked Xianxia, and he intended to provoke and infuriate Xianxia so that Xianxia would lose his calm. Is that so? Xianxia's expression turned cold. Swish! He vanished on the spot, and in the next moment, strands of violet gold sword chi shot into the sky. They were like a myriad of strands of divine light that enveloped the world. Xianxia seems to be infuriated. Shiryu was surprised. Xianxia really was angry. Even until now, these damnable heretics were still humiliating all of them who were cultivators from the ancient god domain, and they took the cultivators of the ancient god domain to be like lowly slaves. Xianxia felt that this was simply unforgivable. Bang! Needless to say, Mukin's divine ability was extremely formidable. Even though his body was instantly slashed into pieces by Xianxia's sword chi, he would recover once more in a very short period of time. If Xianxia utilized the energy of Terminus, then he would naturally be able to put an end to all of this with ease. However, he was unable to strike a lethal blow in order to protect the lives of Kong Yuran and the others. This caused his offense to be affected in the end. Ha ha ha! The energy of Terminus is terrifying indeed, but you just happen to lack the guts to utilize it. You can only blame yourself for that. Mukin roared with laughter in an extremely arrogant manner. He felt that it was practically impossible for Xianxia to defeat him under such circumstances. Swish! Suddenly, a large net that was chilly and illusory like starlight had soared into the sky, and then it enveloped the surroundings. What's that? Mukin's pupils constricted. However, before he could make any reaction, his body was slashed into a myriad of water droplets by a strike of Xianxia's sword, and then the water droplets were fully enveloped by the net before they could even fuse together and restore his body. After that, the large net constricted swiftly. The net that was chilly and illusory like starlight was naturally the overarching heaven net. Even though Mukin's body had recovered after he was restrained by it, he was utterly unable to struggle free no matter how hard he tried. As the net contracted incessantly, Mukin finally felt terrified, and he let out a loud, shrill, and miserable cry that carried deep unwillingness. He tried to transform into fine streams of water to escape the net. However, he noticed to his despair that the net was like an iron wall that was densely covered in terrifying energy, causing all his attempts to have been done in vain. Bang! In the end, under the astounded gazes of everyone, Mukin's body was restrained by the net and transformed into a fist-sized ball of water. After that, she tossed him forcefully to Shiryu. At this point, Mukin had been crushed. Next, killing intent coiled all around Shi's body because he couldn't be bothered to conceal it anymore. His clothes fluttered along with his hair, and while he was standing there without motion, he emanated an imposing aura of supremacy. Shi, you're bound to just perish here in the end, so why resist stubbornly? Along with a low and influencing voice, another black-robed figure flashed out, and then transformed into an extremely delicate and charming woman with snow-white skin. A mysterious diagram of green vines coiling around the sky while all living beings lay prostrated on the ground was branded on the center of her forehead, and it was like an ancient totem or tattoo that flowed with divine radiance. She noticed that this woman wasn't simple because the aura that suffused her body was even more formidable than the auras of Rue, Wan, and Baizha when they joined forces. You're probably not aware that this era has come to its end, and the last days are about to arrive. At that time, everything in this world will be destroyed. All things will collapse while all living beings will cease to exist. Only we ancient shamans will be able to survive. The woman wasn't impatient to enter into battle, and she spoke slowly in a unique voice. Your current resistance against us is clearly extremely unwise. Arui frowned. He seemed to be displeased but didn't obstruct all of this in the end. You're merely exaggerating to arouse fear in us. A wisp of disdain arose on the corners of Shi's mouth. No, you don't understand. We ancient shamans survived the obliteration of the last era, so we naturally possess a clearer understanding of all of this. The woman had a serious and calm expression, and she seemed very sincere. Now I can make the decision and give you a chance. So long as you side with us, then not only will you be able to survive the grand abyss of catastrophe, you'll be able to avoid the calamity of destruction that'll befall this era in the future when the last days arrive. You'll be able to live eternally with our ancient shaman line. Shi was stunned. He was slightly surprised that she would actually try to persuade him like this right now. How laughable! I never entrust my fate to others. She said coldly. Not to mention that if I'm unable to kill all of you heretics who intend to bring calamity to the world, then would living have any meaning? The woman shook her head and sighed. You're wrong. Even until now, you're unable to understand how terrifying the calamity of an era is. It's an unstoppable situation. It's not just you. Everyone in the world will be unable to escape this calamity that'll sweep through the era. At that time, you won't think that I'm just exaggerating to arouse fear in you. She paused for a moment and continued. Earlier, you saw the door of the last days as well. Do you know what all of that means? She frowned. He was unable to figure out what sort of tricks this woman intended to play. You're wrong. The calamity of this era isn't impossible to stop. Right at this moment, Jianan stood up with a solemn expression on his face, and he said in a low voice, since the ultimate path hasn't appeared in the eras of the past, it'll definitely appear in this era. So long as one arrives at the end of that path, then all danger can be resolved while the fate of the era can be remade. The ultimate path. It'll appear in this era. It wasn't just Shi who was shocked when he heard this. The ancient shamans were the same. They revealed all sorts of expressions and had various thoughts in their hearts. Even if what you said is true, the woman took a deep breath and said, up until now, there hasn't been a single person in the ancient god domain who has accomplished that. Right? Jianan's expression remained unchanged. But it doesn't represent that no one can accomplish it. According to my knowledge, some supreme existences amongst the 5 extremes of the imperial region have come into contact with its threshold. Impossible! This time it wasn't her but Arui who spoke. His expression was icy cold and carried disdain as he said, I traveled the ancient god domain for 18,000 years, and I'd long since confirmed that not a single one of those so-called supreme existences had accomplished that. Have you gone to the 3 dimensions? Jianan answered with a question. The 3 dimensions. Arui was stunned, and then he chuckled with ridicule. That sort of trash place can't even compare to the ancient god domain at all. How could I have wasted my time there? The 3 dimensions. At this moment, Xianxia's heart couldn't help but shake while he recalled too many secrets. You haven't been there, so you wouldn't understand. Jianan didn't speak anymore after he finished speaking these words. Humph! Arui grunted coldly with disdain. He felt that Jianan was being deliberately mystifying in order to deceive them. Xianxia, have you finished considering it? I'm currently pointing out a path to survival for you. You should consider it well because it's your only chance. Meanwhile, the extremely charming and delicate woman spoke once more. I've finished considering it. Xianxia's expression was indifferent. The woman frowned when she saw this, but she still asked, What's the decision? I'll kill all of you heretics before I consider whether that calamity of an era exists. Xianxia strode forward and pressed down step by step towards her. The ground shook violently and split apart while terrifying cracks swept out. The woman continued, Will you really not reconsider? Xianxia used actions to answer her. Bang! A wisp of sword chi soared into the sky. It was dazzling, brilliant, decisive, and merciless. Swish! The woman's skirt fluttered as numerous green vines suddenly shot out explosively and extended madly. Every single one of them was like a divine arrow that shot through space and enveloped down towards Xianxia. This was her innate divine ability. The vines were like divine swords, and there were millions upon millions of them. They covered the heavens and the earth, and they were extremely violent to the point of blasting space apart and completely destroying it. Xianxia spun the talisman armament like the circle of Tai Chi, and then it suddenly formed a vortex off the sword. Violet gold energy seethed within it, and it completely devoured all the green vines that shot towards Xianxia. The green vines were originally terrifying like divine swords that pierced through space, and every single one of them was like a divine weapon that possessed unimaginable might. However, they'd been destroyed as soon as they appeared. They dense expanse of vines had been crushed into powder by the sword vortex, and it caused terrifying explosions to resound. Rumble! Divine radiance covered the surroundings, and it was a shocking scene. How could his combat strength still be so formidable after experiencing so many battles? Arui and the others were surprised and bewildered, and their hearts grew heavier. Pooh! After a short moment, the woman coughed up a mouthful of blood while her figure staggered back. She'd suffered a heavy injury. Xianxia strode through the air while his imposing aura grew even more blazing. Talisman markings were faintly visible around him, while he seemed like an unstoppable emperor of battle that had come from the ancient time. Ha! The woman's red lips parted lightly, while an obscure howl suddenly erupted from between them. In an instant, the space here was calm while everything seemed normal. Everyone didn't notice anything unusual. However, Xianxia felt a piercing pain from the center of his forehead. It was like his soul had been impacted by a mysterious force, and it intended to slice his soul into pieces. His figure slowed down because of this. Ha! When she noticed this, the woman's howl grew even more intense. She emanated wave after wave of it, and they were like numerous extremely sharp and invisible blades made from will, and they ceaselessly struck Xianxia's soul. Such a divine ability of will was simply too terrifying. It was invisible, immaterial, mysterious, and difficult to block. Xianxia frowned when his figure stiffened slightly and stopped in midair. In the eyes of people in the outside world, it seemed like he'd been possessed. Amoyan's soul-split curse has grown stronger. Arui couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief when he saw this. Earlier, Xianxia's combat strength was shocking, and it seemed like nothing was able to harm him. It was difficult for Arui and the others to accept that. Now, when they saw Xianxia being thwarted by Amoyan's soul attacks, how could Arui and the others no feel delighted? Ha! 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 How could Amoyun let such a superb opportunity slip by? She followed up with even more attacks. Obscure and mysterious sounds were being incessantly emanated from between her lips, and they swept out towards Xianxia. the expressions of Sure Yu and the others had changed. Even though they were unable to sense how terrifying Amoyan's soul attacks were, when they saw Xianxi's stiffened figure and blank expression, they were clearly aware that Xianxi was in a slightly bad situation. Her will was like a blade that struck the soul, and the terrifying and mysterious energy of the curse was invisible and impossible to defend against. It was clearly rather strenuous for Amoyun to utilize such a force. As she ceaselessly emanated the curses, her pretty face had grown ghastly pale and translucent while her entire body was drenched by sweat. An ancient shaman spoke swiftly. Amoyun is fighting desperately with the intention of crushing Xianxi during this battle. Wouldn't it be better if she succeeded? A wisp of burning desire and a gratified expression arose within Arui's eyes, and he seemed to be impatiently awaiting the moment that Xianxi was crushed on the spot. It was long before blood suddenly started dripping from the center of Xianxi's forehead. His entire body had stiffened like he was a statue, and he stood there motionlessly. Swoosh! When she witnessed this scene, a wisp of bright light suddenly flashed through Amoyan's eyes while she was on the verge of collapse. In the next moment, her figure flashed while a dazzling and resplendent green vine appeared between her fingers, and it didn't make a single sound as it struck towards Xianxi. Its target was Xianxi's throat. The hearts of Shiryu and the others constricted while their bodies tensed up, and they couldn't help but shout loudly with the intention of warning Xianxi about the approaching attack. Bang! However, right at this moment, Xianxi suddenly opened his eyes, and the talisman armament in his hand flashed out horizontally. An enormous explosion resounded as the green vine in Amoyan's hand had exploded into pieces, whereas her entire body was blasted flying as if she'd been struck by a storm. Moreover, she coughed up blood incessantly, and it had dyed her clothes red. All the spectators in the surroundings were astounded and filled with disbelief. This unexpected event was too sudden. No one had expected that Xianxi would actually regain his consciousness at such a critical moment and heavily injure Amoyun in one go. Impossible! Amoyan's sharp cry resounded through the battlefield, and it carried extreme despair and unwillingness. He was utterly unaware that everything had been orchestrated by Xianxi. Her soul attacks were terrifying indeed, but Xianxi's soul was extremely formidable and had the protection of the Dao Seal mark, so it was utterly unable to shake Xianxi at all. It was even to the extent that the blood from the center of his forehead was a trick that Xianxi had utilized to deceive her. Fuck off! At this moment, Xianxi's gaze was cold, emotionless, and fierce like a bolt of lightning as he struck with his sword. It forcefully slapped Amoyun flying, and she fell to the ground in front of Shiryu. Moreover, countless bones within her entire body had broken, causing her to instantly fall unconscious on the spot. Amoyan's capture represented that 9 experts from Arui's side had been defeated by Xianxi. 9. This number was extremely normal. However, at this moment it seemed Tom possessed magic that shocked everyone. For a time, an expanse of deathly silence filled this completely sealed-off shaman spirit battle domain. Everyone was looking towards the battlefield, and they gazed at that man who seemed unrivaled like an emperor of war. Xianxi had successively killed 3 ancient shamans and captured 6 more alive. He swept through everyone by himself with peerless divine might, and he was simply unstoppable in battle. If news of this were to spread to the ancient god domain, then it would definitely cause a huge stir that shook the world. Damn it! Some ancient shamans gritted their teeth, and they clenched their fists tightly to the point their knuckles turned white and their veins bulged up. They wished for nothing more than to kill Xianxi immediately. However, an extremely cruel reality stood right before him. Xianxi's combat strength was too heaven-defying. He seemed impossible to shake, and no one dared to guarantee that they were able to deal with him anymore. Shiryu and the others were delighted, and Jianan even couldn't help but reveal a wisp of a relaxed and relieved expression on the corners of his mouth. Next, Xianxi's voice was like an iron chisel that stabbed forcefully into the ears of the ancient shamans. It caused their hearts to tremble while a feeling of humiliation arose in their hearts. Moreover, they felt rage that couldn't be restrained. There was merely a single opponent, yet this opponent stood in their paths and was unrivaled until now. So how could they accept this? When they faced such a scene and heard the word next, it seemed extremely ear-piercing to them. As soon as Xianxia finished speaking, his gaze swept coldly at Arui and the others. His expression was indifferent, calm, and composed. However, he seemed like an overlord that was looking down at from above, and it carried a form of coldness, indifference, and contempt that pierced the bone. This caused Arui to be almost unable to control himself. The space between his brows was filled with a wisp of a gloomy expression, and his expression grew gloomy to the extreme. What? Are you feeling very aggrieved, helpless, and resentful? A wisp of a piercingly cold arc arose on the corners of Xianxia's mouth. You dare brag about crushing this era and both look down upon and trample upon the dignity of all cultivators with just this bit of ability? How truly laughable. You really overestimate yourselves. Bastards like all of you deserve to hide in the forgotten grounds of chaos like stinking bugs and be trapped here. His voice was calm and indifferent as he shouted at them and looked down upon all the ancient shamans. At this moment, Xianxia suddenly thought of the late imperial monarch Yanbing, and he recalled everything he'd heard on that day. When you become region lords, you'll be captured like prey by those heretics. The divine Tao laws in your possession will be stripped away by them. Your energy, spirit, and essence will be devoured by their shaman beasts. It's even to the extent that your bodies will be utilized by them, and you'll become monsters that are neither human, ghost, god, or devil. You'll be unable to pass away completely for eternity. It seemed like Imperial Monarch Yanbing's voice that was filled with extreme hatred and despair had resounded once more in his heart, and it caused Xianxia's killing intent to burn even brighter. Those of a different era definitely have ill intent. These ancient shamans who'd survived from the last era had cold and cruel dispositions, and they took all the cultivators of the ancient god domain to be ants. Moreover, they even intended to bring calamity to the world and destroy the current era. When he faced bastards like these who had malicious intent and wanted to see the world burn, how could Xianxia maintain his calm? He wished for nothing more than to annihilate all of these bastards. Xianxia. When he heard Xianxia's words that were filled with disdain, Arui was utterly infuriated. It was like an ocean of fire was boiling in his eyes, and it seemed to be on the verge of incinerating the 9 heavens. Get up here if you're disgruntled. Xianxia spoke in an icy cold voice and was utterly indifferent towards Arui's extreme rage. The atmosphere here instantly became murderous to the extreme. Everyone thought that Arui would be unable to restrain himself and fight Xianxia. However, in the next moment, Arui seemed to have made some sort of decision. He fell silent for a short moment before he actually roared with cold laughter and said, "How laughable! It's truly laughable. The board is set, and the situation is in my favor. No matter if it's you or the entire era, everything will be crushed into nothingness. I don't care about all of that. At this moment, all I want to do is kill all of you." Xianxia's voice was resolute and extremely overbearing. "Haha, you ant. Do you really think you can turn the situation around? I'll allow you to understand the gap between us once I make a move." Arui roared with laughter, but his voice was icy cold to the extreme. As he spoke, he flicked his sleeve, and then he turned around swiftly to gaze at the last 6 ancient shamans that remained. "Do as I said just now and fight him one by one. If it really comes to it and no one is able to defeat that bastard, then I will do everything in my power to annihilate him." As soon as these words were spoken, it caused Xianxia to frown, and he said coldly, "Is constantly sending others to their deaths the style of the ancient shamans?" He wanted to infuriate Arui and deal with this fellow first. Unfortunately, Arui seemed to have not noticed at all. He seemed to be extremely calm at this moment, and he couldn't even be bothered to argue with Chen 11 and didn't say anything. This caused Xianxia to have a faint feeling that there was something strange about Arui's actions. Could it be that this fellow is hesitating about something? "I'll kill you. I'll do it." Loud shouts had resounded successively before Xianxia could even figure it out. Even though the ancient shamans were arrogant, they weren't afraid of battle. In the end, a man whose entire body was crimson red like flames and seemed like the sun had ascended the battlefield. He was extremely dazzling and resplendent. Kill! The man was called Tai Gen, and he was from the True Flame Spirit Shaman tribe. He was born with the ability to control all fire, and he possessed boundless might that was capable of incinerating the sky and boiling the ocean. As soon as he stepped foot onto the sacrificial altar, Tai Gen had attacked ferociously. His entire body transformed into a brilliant and scorching sun that emanated blazing divine flames with the intention of incinerating Xianxia. Needless to say, Tai Gen was very strong, and he wasn't inferior to Suolin and Amoyun. However, he clearly seemed to be inferior when he faced a heaven-defying figure like Xianxia. After 10 minutes passed, bang! A wisp of dazzling sword chi swept through the sky and forcefully pierced a hole through Tai Gen's chest. And then he was blasted flying by the impact, utterly defeated, and captured. You overestimated your strength. Xianxia spoke in a light voice. After that, Arui seemed to have completely become an unconcerned party. He watched coldly and silently, and no one knew exactly what he was thinking. On the other hand, the ancient shamans on Arui's side seemed to have made a decision. They stopped fearing Xianxia and challenged Xianxia successively as Arui had instructed. The 11th battle. Lei Yunba, a descendant of the Steel Turtle Shaman tribe. His entire body was golden while a bronze turtle shell covered his back. The shell was branded with dense and strange shaman markings that were extremely striking, and it seemed as if they possessed a boundless aura of the Tao. His arms were like pillars that could support the sky. They were thick, large, hard, and comparable to weapons. However, he was most skilled at defense instead. In other words, as a descendant of the Steel Turtle Shaman tribe, Lei Yunba's strongest innate divine ability was his defensive ability. There was practically no one present here who could rival his defense. When the battle erupted, Lei Yunba had vividly displayed this advantage, and he made all of Xianxia's lethal moves to fail before him. However, he was still defeated in the end. He'd been struck a myriad of times by Xianxia's talisman armament, and every single stab was at the same point on the shell. In the end, a hole had been forcefully broken open, and the talisman armament pierced his body, causing him to be unable to struggle at all. The 12th battle. Sun Wuxia, an expert from the Gold Crane Blood Shaman tribe. He was tall, handsome, and he had golden long hair, skin that was smooth and fair as jade, and a pair of extremely beautiful golden wings. The wings were covered in a translucent blood-red layer that seemed like glass, while strands of blood-red bolts of lightning enshrouded the air beneath that blood-red layer, and they circulated there incessantly and interweaved together on the wing. It was an extremely shocking sight. Sun Wuxia's speed was extremely swift while his attacks were peerlessly fierce and quick. His golden wings possessed an inconceivable divine ability. They were able to deflect all attacks, so it was impossible to harm him at all. However, Xianxia had defeated him after merely 10 minutes had passed. The method Xianxia utilized was extremely simple and crude. He first utilized the copper coin of Treasurefall to restrain Sun Wuxia, and then grabbed both of Sun Wuxia's with both his hands before forcefully tearing them off Sun Wuxia. Blood sprayed down like rain while Sun Wuxia had let out a shrill cry and fainted on the spot. The 13th battle. Yi Yuhen, a descendant of the Nether Berserker Shaman tribe. After the time for an incense stick to burn, Xianxia had chopped off his arms, pierced his stomach, and blasted half his body apart. Yi Yuhen had almost perished from this, but he was defeated and captured in the end. The 14th battle. As battle after battle erupted, the battles grew more and more intense. Those ancient shamans utilized all their ability and even didn't hesitate to fight desperately. But in the end, they were crushed successively. It wasn't that they were too weak, and it was Xianxia who was too heaven-defying instead. No one had imagined that after Xianxia had experienced numerous battles in succession, he was still able to maintain a practically peak combat strength and didn't seem to show any signs of weakening from exhaustion. This caused the ancient shamans to be unable to help but feel a feeling of despair and powerlessness when they faced him. It was like he was impossible to shake. They were all ancient shamans that had survived from the last era. Which one of them wasn't a terrifying and unprecedented existence? But it just so happened that all of them were crushed successively by Xianxia and his sword. Even Sure Yu and the others wouldn't be able to believe this if they hadn't witnessed it with their own eyes. After all of this was too world-shocking and unimaginable. This clearly showed that even though he'd just advanced into the ranks of region lords, Xianxia's combat strength had long since ascended to an astounding height. The 15th battle. His opponent was a strange ancient shaman who was around 1 m tall, wore a fiery red doo-doo, and had the appearance of a 6-year-old child. His name was Wan Shuiqing, and he was from the Cloud Spirit Shaman tribe. He possessed the innate inheritance of embracing all, and he was able to transform into everything and all techniques. When he fought, figures of him filled the entire sacrificial altar. It was like he had a myriad of clones. The fakes were mixed with the real, and it was simply unpredictable. Moreover, his methods of battle were extremely shocking. He possessed numerous supreme shaman daos, and he was absolutely the most difficult enemy that Xianxia had fought until now. It was even to the extent that Xianxia had suffered a slight loss during the battle. His left arm was torn apart, causing the flesh and skin on it to split open, and it had almost been broken off. In the end, Xianxia had relied on the Dao Seal mark to lock onto his opponent, and then he seized an opportunity to heavily injure Wan Shuiqing's body, causing Wan Shuiqing to be crushed and captured. At this point, all the 15 terrifying ancient shamans had been utterly defeated by Xianxia, and only a Rui remained. Such an accomplishment in battle could already be considered as one that would shine through the ages, be celebrated eternally. 15 ancient shamans had suffered crushing defeats. When they witnessed these battles, Sure Yu and the others had become slightly numbed from the shock for some time now, and it was even to the extent that they weren't surprised anymore. He was too formidable. Xianxia and his sword had become an unshakable scene on the shaman spirit's sacrificial altar, and he'd taken everyone's breaths away. In the past, no one would have imagined that such a scene would appear. After all, Xianxia was merely a region lord, and his true cultivation was merely at the first star of the imperial monarch realm. However, it just so happened that he'd obtained successive victories and defeated his opponents in succession under such a situation. All of this seemed extremely inconceivable. If news of this were to spread to the ancient god domain, then there would probably be no one who would dare to believe it. Outsiders were merely able to notice Xianxia's glory, and only Xianxia understood how much pain and hard work he'd exerted in order to possess his current combat strength. There was always too much loneliness and pain behind glory. On the other hand, after he'd witnessed all of this, Arui actually revealed a rare moment of calmness and silence at this moment. He was like an unconcerned party that didn't show even a trace of rage and resentment. This sort of display was very unusual. Or perhaps Arui had expected that this would happen, so he wasn't surprised? Xianxia didn't pay any attention to all of this. After he defeated Wan Shuiqing, who looked like a child, his gaze had locked onto Arui while his expression was calm and indifferent. The atmosphere here was slightly quiet as no one spoke. Sure Yu and the others glanced at Xianxia, then glanced at Arui, who stood in the distance, and they inexplicably felt slightly nervous. It was because they were clearly aware that all of this would end if Arui was defeated. However, how could Arui be so easy to defeat? As the leader of the ancient shamans here, Arui had always seemed to be concealing his strength. Even at this very moment, he still hadn't emanated much of a shocking aura. But the more it was like this, the more shocking it was, and no one dared to underestimate him. If one considered it carefully, then Arui had fought Xianxia on more than one occasion while he was using the identity of Wang Zhong, and every single battle had ended with his defeat. However, Sure Yu and the others were clearly aware that Wang Zhong was merely one of Arui's identities, and he wasn't Wang Zhong anymore. Once he returned to the forgotten grounds of chaos, he hadn't just fused with the strength of his original body, he'd even become the leader of the ancient shamans. So, how could such a figure be ordinary? Thus, even if merely Arui remained right now, Sure Yu and the others didn't dare relax at all. Conversely, they couldn't help but become nervous and feel a strand of pressure when they knew that Xianxia was about to fight Arui. Even Jianan was no exception. Jianan had noticed something unusual about Arui since the Dao discussion, and since they entered the forgotten grounds of chaos and until he met Arui now, Jianen still felt that he was unable to see through Erui. Even if he utilized the supreme divine technique of the Buddhist sect, the mind's eye, he was still unable to see through Erui's true ability, and all of this caused Jianen to be vigilant and not dare be careless at all. Since the beginning of this battle, I've been constantly thinking about exactly which one of your destinies would be most suitable for me. Now, I've finally ascertained that so long as I kill you, Xianxia, and seize your destiny, then perhaps, I don't have to wait until the next era to step foot onto the end of the ultimate path. After a moment of silence, Erui had spoke abruptly with a calm expression. He gazed indifferently at Xianxia, who stood atop the sacrificial altar in the distance, and he seemed like he was talking with a friend and wasn't oppressive at all. Xianxia's brows raised, and he said, "Could it be that you intend to waste your breath before the battle as well? I'm not interested in listening to a long-winded speech from you." Erui didn't mind at all, and he said, "Could it be that you don't want to know why I'm sure that you'll be able to open to door of the last days?" Xianxia was intrigued in his heart but didn't answer. But Erui continued and said, "It's very simple. You possess the river diagram, so it represents that your identity is extremely different because of it." The river diagram? Sure, you and the others were stunned. They knew that since a long time ago that Xianxia possessed the river diagram, and it was exactly because of the river diagram that the sovereign sect was so hostile towards him and wished for nothing more than to kill him. However, when they heard Erui now, it seemed like there were other secrets related to the river diagram. Jianen seemed to have thought of something, and his lips moved slightly. However, he seemed to have been slightly unsure and didn't say anything in the end. Since the ancient times until now, more than one calamity of an era has descended. According to my knowledge, there were at least 8 eras that were obliterated before this era. Erui had his hands behind his back, and he didn't speak about the river diagram. He said indifferently instead, "You ought to be clearly aware that every single era represents a different cultivation culture and an incomparably long cycle of reincarnation. When facing the course of nature, no matter how extraordinary your cultivation is, you'll be obliterated along with the era and fully cease to exist if you don't have a method to protect yourself." He paused for a moment and continued, "Why does every single era move unavoidably towards destruction? Simple. It's because there was utterly no one in these eras who was able to step foot onto the end of the ultimate path." What was the end of the ultimate path? No one knew. But it existed. It was just Xianxia who was sure of that, even sure you and the others were the same. However, they'd never imagined that the destruction of every era was actually related to the ultimate path. Of course, all of this seems extremely unreal when spoken about right now. It isn't just all of you, even I'm unable to confirm if it's really the truth. Otherwise, how could we ancient shamans have been reduced to such an extent? Otherwise, how could your cultivation culture have emerged? Erui sighed with emotion, and his voice was slightly melancholic. Xianxia frowned. "What exactly are you trying to say?" He had no desire to discuss the calamity of the eras or the end of the ultimate path with Erui, because all of that wasn't related to him now. Not to mention that Erui was his enemy. Xianxia wasn't interested in discussing all of this with Erui. "It's very simple." Erui's expression became serious while a wisp of a mysterious glow flashed in his eyes as he gazed at Xianxia. He said, "Because a possessor of the river diagram would open the door of the last days before every single era was obliterated." He paused for a moment and continued, "In other words, the fuse that started the destruction of every single era was a possessor of the river diagram." What? Sure, you and the others were horrified, surprised, and bewildered. It was the first time that they'd heard of such a rumor, and it was simply world-shocking. Even if it was Xianxia, he couldn't help but be extremely shocked at this moment, and his brows had knit together tightly. "A person like you is a so-called savior of an era. You're born because of the calamity, and you herald the arrival of the last days." Erui spoke word by word. His gaze burned with desire as he stared fixedly at Xianxia, and his voice carried a strand of incomprehensible fervor. "Now, you ought to understand why I stopped at nothing in order to draw all of you into the grand abyss of catastrophe, right? because only you can open the door of the last days, and only you can bring the calamity of the last days into the ancient god domain and obliterate this era. She was very sure that all of this wasn't a lie, but he still felt that it was extremely absurd and laughable. Because according to his knowledge, he wasn't the first existence to have obtained the river diagram fragments, and both the master of Oracle Mountain, Fuxi, and the master of the Mancha period, Xian, were comprehenders of the river diagram as well. If it was really as Arui said, then didn't it mean that Xian and Fuxi were saviors of an era as well? Most importantly, she still hadn't obtained the final river diagram fragment until now. In other words, he still couldn't be considered to be a true comprehender of the river diagram. Under such circumstances, in Xi's opinion, every single thing Arui said felt like it was an exaggeration to arouse fear. As for Yu and the others, they'd already become dumbstruck upon hearing this secret. Arui seemed to have seen through Xi's thought and chuckled. I forgot to tell you, there are 9 saviors during every single era. 9 is the end of numbers, and it represents the limits of all things. In terms of the entire era, it represents the end of an era, and you, Shi, are the 9th savior of this era. If the door of the last days isn't opened by you, then I'm afraid even the heavens wouldn't allow that to happen. Shi frowned and fell silent. Yu and the others were surprised and bewildered. They didn't know why Arui spoke about all of this now, but they'd faintly determined that there was no need for Arui to be deliberately mystifying at a time like this. But the strange thing is that I've sensed an aura that's completely different from the saviors of the past coming from you. Your fate can't be determined, and you even possess the Terminus Tao insight. This isn't something that the other saviors were able to possess. At this moment, even Arui frowned. It seemed like he'd hidden this question in his heart for a long time, and he couldn't help but speak of it now. Are you done? She spoke coldly, as if those words from before hadn't caused any fluctuation in his emotions. I'm done. Arui's eyes narrowed before he grinned in the end. No matter what, once I kill you and seize your destiny, I'll possess everything that you possess. At that time, I'll be the savior, and I'll be able to enter the door of the last days and look for the true secrets. As he finished speaking, his eyes emanated extremely blazing killing intent that couldn't be concealed at all. Then get up here and fight me. She had an emotionless expression as he spoke these words. No, we have to make a trade before we fight. Arui shook his head. What trade? Asked Shi. Release those subordinates of mine, and I'll return your companions as well. Arui pointed casually at Kong Yuran and the others who were restrained at the side and spoke in a light voice. All right. Shi thought for a moment before he agreed. Even if he was using over 10 people in exchange for Kong Yuran, Yechen, Yujihue, and Zhao Qingyao, he still felt that it was worth it. As far as Shi was concerned, the lives of Kong Yuran and the others were clearly thousands of times more valuable than those heretics. This was the attitude that Shi treated his companions with, and it hadn't changed since he started cultivating until now. It was precisely this mentality of his that allowed him to will over numerous genuine friends. This time, no matter if it was Arui or Shi, they hadn't played any tricks during the exchange. In the end, he'd gotten Kong Yuran and the others back, and he'd handed them over to Yu and the others to take care of them. On the other hand, Arui had gotten those ancient shamans back as well. It seemed to be a satisfying outcome, but all of this hadn't come to an end yet, because this was the shaman spirit battle domain, and they were bound to be unable to leave it until they determined life and death between each other. On the other hand, this outcome would be determined by this final battle. It would be determined by the impending battle between Shi and Arui. Step, step. Amidst the deathly silent atmosphere in the surroundings, Arui raised his feet and started moving step by step towards the shaman spirit's sacrificial altar. He had his hands behind his back, and he seemed rather outstanding. As he strode, a strand of dazzling divine light swept out from beneath his feet. It was an expanse of divine, mighty, and dazzling light that caused him to seem like a god of war that had descended to the world. The heavens and the earth started to tremble, and it seemed to be submitting to Arui. This was an extremely extraordinary scene. It was like Arui had instantly become a completely different person. He was like a peerless divine king that had descended to the world, and he revealed a peerlessly elegant bearing. Space trembled and droned while an invisible, vast, and divine force field that seemed to have been suffused by the Grand Tao covered the entire shaman spirit battle domain. Sure, Yu and the others were horrified. In their vision, Arui really had changed. His imposing aura was rising incessantly and transforming without end. Every single stride he took seemed to improve his cultivation by a level, and it was too inconceivable. In the end, his entire body was suffused by divine light that was otherworldly and peerless. He revealed a form of inviolable dignity, the energy of a holy shaman. He's a descendant of the supreme holy king of the ancient shamans. Xianxia suddenly stood up while a wisp of shock arose on his face. The supreme holy king was the only terrifying existence during the last era who'd attained a status comparable to the only overlord of the entire era. And he was even more formidable than the masters of the 5 extremes of the imperial region. The supreme holy king, the only overlord. The expressions of Sure Yu and the others changed slightly when they heard this. How could they have imagined that Arui's identity would actually be so shocking? This fact hadn't caused even a fluctuation in Xianxia's emotions. The true source of his shock was the imposing aura that Arui revealed right now. If Arui's imposing aura was like that of a region lord at the first star of the imperial monarch realm earlier, then his cultivation had broken through and advanced incessantly right now. At this point, it was already able to exert pressure on Xianxia, and he wasn't able to see through Arui's cultivation anymore. This was extremely shocking. Even though Xianxia had guessed that Arui was entirely different from the other ancient shamans, how could he have imagined that the strength Arui possessed would actually be so terrifying? Xianxia, this fellow is extremely dangerous. You must be careful. During the last era, he was a terrifying existence akin to the son of the overlord, and he possesses inconceivable might. Xianxia's reminder resounded by Xianxia's ear, and it caused Xianxia to be even more vigilant and cautious. This was the final battle. So long as he killed Arui, it would be equivalent to killing all the others. So, Xianxia would absolutely not allow himself to make the slightest mistake at such a moment. Even through the imposing aura Arui revealed right now was extremely terrifying. Xianxia was utterly unafraid because he had a trump card that he hadn't utilized as well. Bang! Arui stepped foot on the sacrificial altar. At this moment, his blood-red robe fluttered while every single inch of his skin emanated a divine glow. As he stood there casually, he seemed like the backbone of the world and the pillar of all things, and he emanated a dignified and imposing aura of supremacy. His strength is comparable to a 9th-star region lord at least. How can Xianxia even fight this battle? In an instant, Xianxia's expression had changed to reveal a rare solemn expression. He determined that Arui's current imposing aura was actually not inferior to a region lord at the 9th-star Imperial Monarch realm. The 9th-star Imperial Monarch realm was the last barrier of the Imperial Monarch realm, and it was the Tao Lord realm that stood up above it. On the other hand, Xianxia had merely just advanced into the Imperial Monarch realm. So, no matter how heaven-defying his combat strength was, how could he possibly defeat such an opponent? The gap was too huge. The gap between them was more than just a level wide, and it was an entire 8 levels instead. So, how could Xianxia possibly fight such a battle? At this moment, Sure Yu and the others finally understood why Arui seemed so confident and composed earlier. It turned out that he'd been concealing his true combat strength. Xianxia had obviously noticed this as well, and his eyes couldn't help but narrow while he revealed a rare wisp of a solemn expression. The vital energy in his entire body seethed while the region within his body rumbled as it circulated. It seemed as if his entire body was on fire and surging, and vast violet golden divine radiance coiled around him. At this moment, Xianxia seemed to have revealed his full strength without holding back at all. But even then, Xianxia still couldn't help but feel indescribable pressure when he faced Arui who stood in the distance. This was pressure that was caused by the gap in their cultivations, and it made it impossible for even Xianxia to completely negate the oppressive force from this. This clearly showed how terrifying Arui's combat strength would be once he revealed it when the battle began. I'd been observing just now. If it's in the ancient god domain, then the combat strength you possess right now is sufficient to go against region lords at the 4th-star Imperial Monarch realm. If you fight desperately, you can even go up against a 5th-star region lord. It's absolutely unprecedented. And it's probably impossible to find a single person comparable to you in the entire world. Arui grinned as he spoke with a calm and composed tone. Unfortunately, no matter how heaven-defying you are, you're nothing before me. As he finished speaking, a wisp of absolute confidence arose on his face. He was dignified, arrogant, and terrifying. I really didn't expect that you would have concealed so much strength. But the outcome of this battle is still undecided. Xianxia had remained silent for a moment before his expression had turned extremely cold and calm. Even if his opponent had suddenly become extremely strong, he was still completely unafraid. No, you'll definitely lose this time. Arui's expression was calm, and he seemed to have victory in the palm of his hands and control over the entire world. Bang! The heavens and the earth split apart while horrifying whistled and rumbling swept through the surroundings. Arui had attacked ferociously and smashed his fist forward. Divine light surged while the sacrificial altar started trembling. He was too strong, and he was far from something any one of those other ancient shamans could compare to. At this moment, Arui revealed a peerless demeanor. He was confident and arrogant, and merely a single punch of his revealed an aura of absolute power. This caused the expressions of Yu and the others to change, and they were on the verge of being suffocated. Bang! Even if Xianxia tried to resist with all his might, he was forcefully blasted flying by the might of this punch, and the bones within his entire body had almost split apart. At this instant, Yu and the others felt cold as if they'd fallen into an icy pit. This is too terrifying. Too weak. Feel free to utilize any ability you possess. Otherwise, it won't be long before your destiny will belong to me. Arui had a warm smile on his face while divine light flowed within his eyes, and it was like a region with boundless divine might was circulating within his eyes. He strode forward as he spoke, and his palm was like a blade as he swung it lightly. Swish! Space was like a canvas that was easily torn into pieces while peerless divine light shot forward. It seemed as if they traversed the annals of time, broke through the barriers of space, and were impossible to stop. Clang! Xianxia gritted his teeth. The talisman armament glowed and was suffused with violet gold light. It seemed like the talisman armament was burning as a myriad of talisman markings converged on it and illuminated the heavens. He'd displayed the might of the 4th level of the Sword Emperor realm to its extremes. Bang! But in merely an instant, his attack was blasted into pieces like it was weak as paper. On the other hand, Xianxia seemed as if he'd been struck by a myriad of mountains, and he was forcefully blasted flying once more. He coughed up blood in midair while his countenance swiftly turned pale, and the vital blood in his entire body roiled without end. He's too formidable. This is simply a form of absolute destruction. How can this battle even be carried out? The eyes of Yu and the others had almost split apart from rage when they witnessed this scene. They clenched their fists tightly and wished for nothing more than to charge forward and fight by Xianxia's side. You're still too weak. Xianxia, where's those airs that you put on earlier? You dare challenge me when you only possess such little strength. Arui's smile grew even more brilliant while he strode slowly, as if he was strolling through his own backyard, and his voice was filled with dense disdain and ridicule. Idiot! Xianxia lightly spat out a single word from between his lips that had blood flowing out of them, and his figure flashed as he took the initiative to attack. Swish! A clear howl erupted from the talisman armament as it descended from the sky. It was covered in violet gold sword light that surged like an ocean, and it seemed to carry the might to obliterate the world and destroy everything within it. Idiot! Arui's narrow and long eyes narrowed while he swung his palm with force. Bang! A strand of divine light descended like a bolt of lightning and blasted Xianxia's attack into pieces, and then it pierced a bloody hole through his left shoulder and almost took of his entire left arm. There's no rush. Let's take it slow. I'll allow you to understand the gap between us and how living can be worse than death. Arui spoke word by word, and every single word of his carried a murderous aura as it reverberated through the world. Bang! He took a step forward. Divine light shot out from beneath his foot, and it transformed into the diagram of divine lotuses. These lotuses swept out towards the surroundings and confined the heavens and the earth here. At this moment, Arui simply seemed like an invincible king of legend, and he controlled numerous grand Dao and was utterly unshakable. OM. At this moment, Xianxia finally realized how serious the problem was. The aura throughout his body suddenly erupted while his pitch-black long hair swiftly turned snow-white, and his imposing aura was an entire 2 times stronger than before. The god slaughter burst. At this critical moment, Xianxia hadn't hesitated to utilize this divine ability that had been passed down in the Yazi clan. Swoosh! He attacked once more with the talisman armament, and its might was completely different from before. It crushed through the heavens and the earth, and it a horrifying strike. Bang! Their attacks collided head-on once more. Their grand battle on the sacrificial altar was extremely dazzling. The light from the collision had simply enveloped the entire sacrificial altar and crushed the heavens and the earth. Such a battle had long since exceeded the imaginations of Yu and the others, and it wasn't a battle between ordinary region lords anymore. It was sufficient to astound all the cultivators in the world. Rumble. World-shocking sounds of explosions resounded incessantly. It was like this expanse of the heavens and the earth was burning. Divine radiance swept out in all directions, and it simply seemed like the end of the world had arrived. Even though Yu and the others were unable to discern exactly what was happening, their hearts that were in their throats had eased up slightly. At the very least, it seemed like Xianxia, who'd executed the Godslaughter burst, was barely able to resist Arui. However, before they could even feel happy, a cold grunt had suddenly resounded from Arui. OM. In the next moment, a divine sword suddenly appeared in the heavens and the earth, and it seemed like it could obliterate all living beings. The extremely bright edge of the sword seemed to illuminate the ages and collapse the universe. It was too shocking. It had appeared out of nowhere and was grasped in Arui's hand. Merely the imposing aura it revealed was simply on the verge of obliterating the world and severing the river of time. Bang! Merely a single strike with this sword caused Xianxia to be forced back while the talisman armament in his hand trembled incessantly. Moreover, he ceaselessly coughed up blood. Strands of peerlessly violent and sharp energy charged into his body and raged havoc within him, and it caused his vital energy to almost fall into disorder. What an extraordinary technique! It's truly not bad, as you were able to make me utilize the divine sword of the shamans. Once I'd be happy to cultivate that technique once I've seized your destiny. A wisp of an enchanting smile arose on the corners of Arui's mouth, and it was dazzling and resplendent while he seemed as if victory was within his grasps. Idiot! Xianxia spoke the same words once more. Even though his countenance was pale, the space between his brows was still filled with a persistent and firm expression. He wasn't afraid at all. Just this word alone caused Arui's eyelids to twitch imperceptibly. He didn't say another word, and he held the divine swords of the shamans in his hand and created divine lotus diagrams beneath his feet as he moved to assault Xianxia. Bang! After he withdrew the divine sword of the shamans, Arui's imposing aura grew even stronger, and he seemed as if he was truly invincible and capable of crushing everything that stood before him. On the other hand, the trace of an advantage that Xianxia had gained from executing the Godslaughter burst vanished along with this. Xianxia was ceaselessly blasted, flying like an ant that could only be trampled upon. He coughed up blood repeatedly, one powerless to struggle, and his entire body was drenched in blood. His extremely miserable and horrifying appearance caused Yu and the others to be unable to bear to watch, and they felt anxious, aggrieved, and worried to the extreme in their hearts. Arui was too strong. He'd already possessed the might of a 9th-star region lord, and now that he'd withdrawn a sword that possessed unfathomable might, his terrifying strength simply aroused despair in the hearts of others. However, even then, Xianxia actually seemed as if he was unable to sense pain or frustration at all. Every single time he was blasted back, he would stand up resolutely and fight desperately. He seemed as if he'd forgotten life and death, and his persistent and extraordinary appearance caused Shiryu and the others to feel pain, anger, and hatred in their hearts. Their emotions were complicated to the extreme. As the battle continued, even Arui couldn't help but feel surprised because the will to fight that Xianxia revealed was too strong, and it seemed as if it was impossible to crush. But right after that, Arui smiled in a carefree manner and paid no further attention to all of this. Because the more Xianxia acted in this way, the more ruthless he became in his heart. He wanted to crush Xianxia's will and completely trample upon Xianxia's dignity, so that Xianxia would completely collapse and be reduced to a lowly prey that lied prostrate beneath his feet. Bang! 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 Under Arui's absolute suppression, Xianxia was blasted back over and over again. Blood dyed the sky red while his entire body was covered by injuries. There was actually not a single unharmed spot on him. If this were to continue, then Xianxia would be utterly crippled even if he could avoid death. What should we do? The minds of Shiryu and the others were blank. They were frustrated and at a loss for what to do. No one had imagined that Xianxia, who'd attained successive victories in the battles, would actually be crushed by Arui's absolute strength during the final battle. The difference between these two situations was too huge, and it made it difficult to accept. Trash. Let me see how long more you can struggle for. See, this is the gap between you and me. So what if you possess the river diagram? You're dead even if a Tao Lord comes here. Just give up. This is the grand abyss of catastrophe, and it's the territory of my ancient shaman line. No one can survive while I control this place, and you're no exception. You're still trying to struggle? You really do have backbone. However, I like people like you the most because only in this way would I feel a sense of accomplishment after I seize your destiny for myself. As the battle continued, Arui spoke incessantly, and he ridiculed, mocked, and humiliated Xianxia to the extreme. When these words entered into the ears of Shiryu and the others, it angered them to the point of being on the verge of exploding with rage, and they were unable to restrain themselves from cursing Arui. However, Arui remained indifferent towards all of this. His gaze was locked onto Xianxia as if only killing Xianxia could arouse his interest right now. The situation of the battle was horrifying. The battle was bound to be unfair since it had begun because the gap between their respective combat strengths was truly too huge. At this point in the battle, Xianxia's face was covered in blood, causing him to seem terrifying. Only his eyes were still firm, persistent, and hadn't wavered. For no rhyme or reason, Shiryu and the others were overcome by a feeling of sorrow. They felt a form of indescribable sorrow, and they simply wished for nothing more than to go berserk against Arui. Why? Why did it become like this? Could it be that Xianxia is really going to suffer calamity this time? Shiryu and the others were frustrated. They felt helplessness and despair for the first time, and it was the first time that they were full of hatred yet helpless and at a loss for what to do. Their hatred was monstrous. Arui's ridiculing voice resounded frequently from the battlefield, and it was like numerous malicious needles that pierced into their hearts, causing their hearts to be on the verge of shattering. However, they didn't know that a wisp of annoyance had arisen in Arui's heart as well. He hadn't imagined that while Xianxia had clearly suffered a heavy injury and was on the verge of death beneath his absolute strength, Xianxia was actually able to persist until now. He felt that it was simply like a miracle, but it just so happened that Arui couldn't strike a killing blow right now. It wasn't that he wanted to play with Xianxia, and it was instead because he wanted to fully seize Xianxia's destiny. If he wanted to accomplish that, then he had to destroy the defenses of Xianxia's Tao heart, crush Xianxia's will, destroy Xianxia's dignity, and transform Xianxia into complete trash. This was the only way. So long as he accomplished that, then he would be able to smoothly seize Xianxia's energy, essence, spirit, divine Tao laws, and every other form of strength and energy that Xianxia possessed. This was what seizing destiny meant to the ancient shaman. But it was very obvious that Xianxia's will hadn't been crushed. His dignity hadn't collapsed, and the defenses of his Tao heart hadn't wavered at all. Arui couldn't help but frown because of this, and he felt that this was slightly troublesome to deal with. Moreover, a wisp of annoyance couldn't help but arise in his heart. He's just an ant from the ancient god domain. Even if he has become the 9th comprehender of the river diagram during this era and is a worthy savior, he's still too weak in the end. However, it was exactly such a fellow that was able to persist until now while being crushed by Arui's absolute strength. So how could Arui accept this? Bang! Arui practically didn't hesitate to attack even ferociously, and his methods grew more ruthless and fiercer as he tortured Xianxia incessantly. Despicable. Truly too despicable. Sure, you and the others were angered to the point their entire bodies trembled. Because Arui could just kill Xianxia immediately, but he was ceaselessly torturing and humiliating Xianxia with such extremely despicable methods. So, sure, you and the others felt that it was simply unforgivable. However, how could Arui possibly pay any attention to them? At this moment, flames of rage were burning in his heart, and he was attacking Xianxia in a frenzied manner. In the end, Xianxia seemed as if his entire body was mangled and in pieces. It was horrifying and miserable to the point that others didn't dare to look at him. Suddenly, Jianan seemed to have noticed something, and then a wisp of surprise suddenly arose in his eyes. Unlike Shiryu and the others, Jianan had tried hard to maintain his calm throughout this time, and he was watching Xianxia closely. He seemed to desire to notice something. Unfortunately, he'd come up empty-handed until now, and he couldn't help but feel despair and slight frustration because of this. But right at this moment, he suddenly noticed that there was something wrong in the state Xianxia was in. Under ordinary circumstances, any region lord would have been unable to hold on after suffering such suppression. But it just so happened that Xianxia had persisted. On one hand, it was indeed because Xianxia's will to fight was extremely tenacious. But on the other hand, it was from the support of an invisible force. This force couldn't be seen nor touched, and it was impossible to sense its exact shape. But Jianan was sure that it existed. Moreover, it was ceaselessly accumulating, converging, and strengthening within Xianxia. It seemed like it grew stronger every single time Xianxia was struck down, and it was exactly because of this force that Xianxia was able to constantly stand up once more after being struck down successively. What sort of force is that? Jianan was shocked. Can't be seen, felt, and senses. Isn't it a little too ethereal? Even he didn't dare confirm it because he deduced it through some clues, and he hadn't actually sensed it. What exactly is it? In an instant, Jianan's attention had been drawn by it. The battle was still going on. Even though Xianxia was struck down over and over again while his appearance grew more and more horrifying, he still hadn't shown any sign of giving up or being defeated. This caused the agitation in Arui's heart to grow stronger, and a trace of gloominess and viciousness appeared in his composed and calm expression. Something's not right. Before long, Arui seemed to have noticed something, and he suddenly awakened completely from his agitated state. He suddenly stopped attacking while terrifying divine light flowed within his gaze as it locked coldly onto Xianxia, and he scanned Xianxia carefully as if he wanted to detect something. This sudden change of events caused Xianxia, Shiryu, and the others to be stunned. What's this fellow doing? Especially Jianan. His heart couldn't help but jerk. Could it be that this fellow noticed something as well? Wait, even though Arui was unable to notice anything in the end, a wisp of an insecure feeling suddenly surged into his heart. It felt as if it wouldn't be long before a shocking and unexpected event would occur to Xianxia. He took a deep breath while the glow of the divine sword of the shamans in his hand grew brighter. Moreover, its might grew ferocious to the extreme, and it threw the surroundings into disorder. Damnable bastard! Looks like I have no choice but to kill before I seize your destiny. Even though I wouldn't be able to obtain your complete strength like that, it's better than allowing a mishap to occur. His intuition told him that if he still didn't kill Xianxia, then an unexpected and unpredictable event would definitely occur. So, he practically didn't hesitate to attack ferociously with the intent to kill. Bang! His sword soared through the sky while numerous ancient and mysterious diagrams appeared on it. Moreover, divine radiance enshrouded it and illuminated the heavens and the earth in a layer of divine light. The divine sword of the shamans slashed forward. Space rumbled explosively while all things collapsed. The might of this attack was so powerful and dazzling that it caused the bodies of Shiryu and the others to stiffen. Even their blood seemed as if it had been frozen, and it was to the extent that their souls almost left their bodies while they were on the verge of suffocation. It was too terrifying. This fellow clearly intends to kill Xianxia with a single strike. In an instant, the expressions of Shiryu and the others changed abruptly. They were unable to restrain the worry in their hearts any longer, and they charged madly towards the sacrificial altar. At this moment, Xianxia stood on the spot. His entire body was bathed in blood and heavily damaged, and it seemed as if he was terrified by this attack and had stopped moving. However, his gaze was still bright and firm as he gazed at the sword chi that was slashing at him. It seemed as if he was waiting for death, or perhaps he knew he was powerless to resist it and had given up on struggling. Arui didn't know the answer, but this didn't affect his determination to annihilate Xianxia, and it was impossible for him to stop this attack as well. Rumble. The wisp of terrifying sword chi that carried boundless killing intent was about to smash down onto Xianxia. Shiryu and the others were charging madly towards the sacrificial altar. Arui had already revealed a cold smile of victory. Time seemed as if it had frozen at this instant. All sorts of strange and unusual scenes flashed before Xianxia's eyes, and then his gaze suddenly became indifferent, cold, and completely tranquil. At practically the exact same moment, an ancient book silently opened up in front of him. It was like it had opened up an era. It was like it had started a cycle of reincarnation. At this instant, the heavens and the earth were overturned,